Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, where we settle into quiet moments and let curiosity move at an easy pace. Tonight we're taking a slow walk toward a place most of us will never see in person, a region that sounds still and empty but holds forms of life that don't resemble anything in our familiar world. Antarctica often looks simple from a distance, just a wide sheet of white broken by wind and water. Yet beneath its frozen surface lies an environment shaped by crushing pressure, constant darkness, and temperatures that should stop every living cell from functioning. Even so, things survive there. Some of them survive in ways that feel almost unreasonable, and that is what we're easing into tonight. A patient look at the strange creatures that live under Antarctica's ice, and how they manage to keep going in a place that seems designed to halt everything. Before we move too far into that frozen landscape, I'd like to know where you are listening from right now, and whether it's warm or cold where you are. The contrast is interesting because wherever you sit, the conditions around you are nothing like what thrives under that ice sheet. Still, here we are meeting at the same moment, even though we occupy very different environments. If this slow exploration is something you enjoy, or something you find calming at the end of a day, I'd appreciate it if you like the video or subscribed. It helps this space reach others who may want something gentle to listen to as they wind down. As you settle in, it helps to picture that we aren't rushing toward the answer. Instead, we're allowing it to open step by step. The world under Antarctic ice is not a place of sudden discoveries. Scientists who study it move cautiously, drilling through ice that can be thicker than the height of a tall building, lowering instruments into water that hasn't seen direct sunlight for millions of years, and waiting patiently for signs of life. Even when they find something, it rarely announces itself with colour or movement. Many of these organisms are small. Some are barely visible. A few are larger, but live in a way that avoids attention. Darkness does that. It softens everything, and pushes creatures into behaviours better suited for survival than spectacle. That quiet effort is what makes this subject so interesting. Life that survives with limited energy has to minimize waste, which means almost everything living under the ice has evolved simple, durable strategies rather than dramatic abilities. The starting point for understanding these strange inhabitants is the environment itself. Imagine water sealed beneath an ice sheet so thick that no daylight reaches it. The temperature hovers close to freezing. The pressure increases steadily with depth until it reaches levels strong enough to crush unprotected equipment. Oxygen is scarce. Nutrients drift in only when currents manage to slip through cracks or when mineral-rich water rises from below. This is not a place that rewards speed or aggression. Instead, the organisms here must slow themselves, preserve energy, and use whatever limited resources appear. What's surprising is not that anything lives there, but that so many different kinds of things have found ways to make it work. As we move through this environment in a careful way, the first thing to consider is how the region formed these hidden ecosystems. Antarctica wasn't always locked under ice. Millions of years ago, it supported forests and animal life similar to other continents. Over time, continental drift and climate changes isolated it at the bottom of the world. The temperature dropped steadily. Ice accumulated layer by layer until it sealed entire sections of water beneath solid sheets. Once trapped, these waters stopped exchanging freely with the open ocean. The isolation forced life to adapt to conditions that changed far more slowly than the environments most species experience. Over thousands of years, these enclosed spaces became natural laboratories. Evolution took an unhurried path, selecting traits for resilience rather than variety. What followed were organisms that learned to handle extremely low nutrient levels, limited sensory cues, and slow metabolic rates that might seem impossible anywhere else. When researchers lowered their first cameras beneath the Ross Ice Shelf, they expected to see water so empty that small sediment particles would stand out. Instead, they saw movement. It wasn't dramatic movement. It was gentle and deliberate, the kind that comes from creatures that have no reason to rush. Small fish with pale bodies drifted through the beam. Tiny invertebrates clung to surfaces where mineral deposits formed. Microbes coated rock fragments and ice walls with thin, persistent films. These communities looked sparse at first, but the longer the cameras remained, the more life appeared. The impression that nothing could live there slowly dissolved as the evidence accumulated. One of the most interesting aspects of this hidden world is how creatures respond to the absence of light. Without sunlight, photosynthesis is impossible. Most of the energy must come from sources unrelated to the sun, such as minerals in the water or organic material drifting slowly from faraway regions of the ocean. Microorganisms capable of processing chemical compounds take the lead. They form the base of the food system. Their slow but steady activity makes it possible for slightly larger organisms to survive. Small crustaceans graze on these microbial films. Larger invertebrates feed on the crustaceans. Fish adapt to the cold and dark by growing slowly, conserving energy, and supporting sensory systems capable of detecting slight movements or chemical signals in the water. You might imagine this entire space as static, but the reality is more dynamic than it appears. Ice shelves shift, cracks open, water pathways change direction. When this happens, new organisms sometimes drift in from the surrounding ocean. These visitors face a decision forced by the environment itself. They either adapt slowly over generations or disappear. The ones that stay develop features suited to the limited conditions. Over time, they become distinct from their open ocean relatives. This is how the region accumulates species that look familiar at first glance, but behave differently when examined closely. Their survival strategies depend on measured responses rather than rapid ones. Cold slows metabolic reactions. Darkness removes visual cues. Pressure restricts movement. All of these factors produce creatures that appear calm, even when facing conditions that would challenge almost any other living system. Another key part of understanding this world is the presence of subglacial lakes. These lakes sit beneath kilometers of ice. They remain liquid because of pressure and geothermal heat rising from Earth's interior. Some of these lakes have been isolated for so long that the water has not mixed with the outside environment for millions of years. When scientists sampled one of the largest of these lakes, they found microorganisms capable of processing minerals from the lake bed. These microbes form organized communities, working together to convert small amounts of chemical energy into something usable. It isn't a fast process, but speed isn't important in an environment where everything unfolds slowly. What matters is consistency. These organisms deliver that very well. The more deeply researchers investigate, the more they realize the environment supports not just isolated organisms, but entire networks of life. It becomes clear that survival here depends on how each creature influences the next. Nothing operates alone. A small shift in mineral availability can change how microbial mats form. That shift influences the growth of tiny crustaceans, which then affects the feeding strategies of fish. This chain continues upward, each link depending on the stability created by the organisms below. That interdependence is one of the reasons these ecosystems remain stable over long time periods, even with limited resources. Every discovery beneath the ice invites new questions. How do these organisms repair damage at such low temperatures? How do their cell membranes stay flexible? How do proteins function when conditions should slow or stop essential reactions? Scientists have found that many of these creatures produce molecules that act like antifreeze, preventing ice crystals from forming inside their cells. Others adjust the composition of their membranes to keep them from becoming rigid. Some reduce their metabolic requirements so drastically that they can survive periods with almost no available food. These solutions aren't flashy, but they work. The organisms survive because their responses are practical rather than dramatic. As we continue moving through these ideas, the scene under the ice becomes more familiar. It's no longer just a mysterious void. It becomes a place where life persists because it has learned, over long spans of time, to keep going with whatever resources appear. The creatures here don't need sunlight, fast movement, or abundant food. They need dependable strategies. They have them. When we watch them through remotely operated cameras, their slow movements show how well they've adapted. Nothing is wasted. Every action has a purpose. It's unlike the fast competitive systems that shape environments close to the surface. Understanding these creatures also helps us think about life in places far from Earth. When scientists consider the possibility of life on icy moons such as Europa or Enceladus, they look at Antarctica's hidden ecosystems as a guide. If organisms can survive under thick ice sheets here using chemical energy instead of sunlight, then similar strategies might work elsewhere. It doesn't prove anything, but it provides a realistic starting point. The conditions beneath Antarctica's ice are harsh but not empty, which expands our understanding of what life can tolerate. As we ease from this foundation toward deeper examples of specific organisms, the world under Antarctica's ice becomes something we can move through slowly, allowing each detail to build on the last without needing to rush the process. The next stage is to look more closely at the environment that forms the backdrop for all these survival strategies. The long stretch of darkness and quiet that sets the rhythm for everything living down there, and how that steady environment shapes the behaviours and traits of the organisms that endure it. The world under Antarctica's ice is shaped by darkness so complete that the idea of day and night no longer applies in any familiar way. Once you imagine descending through the layers of ice, passing the points where surface sounds fade and the last traces of natural light disappear, you reach a space where time stops having clear markers. Without sunrises or sunsets, without shadows or colour shifts, the creatures that live there navigate an environment in which light serves no purpose at all. It's a steady state, unbroken, constant, and for life forms adapted to it, perfectly normal. What feels unimaginable to us is simply the baseline there. To move through that kind of environment requires adjustments that most surface organisms could never attempt. Yet the ones that survive beneath the ice have made those adjustments so thoroughly that the absence of light no longer feels like a missing component. It's just the way things are. As soon as the last photons disappear, the usual rules for sensing the world shift dramatically. Eyes become less important or disappear entirely. Colour ceases to matter. Movement no longer relies on visual cues. Instead, creatures depend on touch, vibration, pressure, and chemical signals. The environment encourages subtlety because large movements waste energy that cannot be easily replaced. With so little available fuel, every reaction has to count. That's why the organisms down there move in restrained ways, keeping their activities limited to what will keep them alive. The darkness isn't a barrier. It's a guide that shapes how everything functions, from the smallest microbe to the fish that drift quietly between regions of thicker ice and calmer water. When scientists describe the space under the ice as an endless night, they're not exaggerating for effect. The water there has been separated from the sky for millions of years. Even the layers closest to the ice surface receive nothing more than faint scattered light, far below what any plant could use. The deeper areas receive none at all. Darkness becomes the default condition, influencing chemical reactions, energy flow, and behaviour patterns. Some creatures have evolved slow sensory systems that can detect slight variations in water movement. Others rely on chemical gradients that change gently over distance. These tiny signals allow them to locate food, navigate surfaces, or identify areas where conditions are more stable. The consistency of the darkness removes the need for quick adaptation to shifting light levels, which frees the organisms to operate in steady patterns. Because the darkness does not change, the creatures do not need circadian rhythms tied to day-night cycles. Their internal processes follow other cues, such as temperature or nutrient flow. This leads to an interesting contrast. While surface life is governed by cycles of daylight and darkness, the organisms beneath the ice operate on cycles defined by chemical availability or subtle environmental variations. It's almost like they're running on a different version of time, one that moves in accordance with internal needs rather than external forces. The absence of sunlight isn't just a visual condition. It alters everything from metabolism to growth to reproduction. The absence of light also means there is no photosynthesis. Without it, energy must come from other sources. This is where the real strength of the ecosystem begins to show. Microorganisms form the base of the food system by using chemical energy instead of light. They rely on compounds released from minerals, sediments, or slow water mixing. Some use iron or sulfur compounds, others use methane or ammonia. These processes are far slower than photosynthesis, but they are steady. The organisms that depend on them grow slowly. Their populations increase gradually. The food chain that rises from these microbes is modest but persistent. Darkness forces the ecosystem to prioritize efficiency, and efficiency becomes the foundation for survival. When researchers send cameras into these dark waters, the lack of light initially gives the impression that nothing is there. It takes time for the faint movement of small organisms to appear in the camera beam. At first, the watchers might assume that the space is empty. With patience, subtle patterns begin to emerge. Something drifts just outside the range of the light. A small fish adjusts its position in the current. Invertebrates cling to surfaces that look barren until magnified images reveal that they are coated with thin microbial communities. The darkness doesn't hide the ecosystem completely. It simply slows the pace of recognition. The creatures move carefully to avoid unnecessary energy loss, and their movements are easy to miss if you expect the kind of activity found in brighter environments. Life in this unchanging night often means relying on senses that feel unfamiliar to us. Many creatures respond to chemical trails left by others. Some produce faint vibrations that signal their presence. These cues are not dramatic. They function like quiet exchanges of information, enough to coordinate behaviors like feeding, avoidance, or navigation. Over time, the environment becomes a network of signals that operate below the threshold of sight. The creatures don't need vision to detect this network. Their bodies are tuned to it, shaped by generations of refinement in a place where vision offers no advantage. Another element that shapes this world is pressure. As you descend farther into the water beneath the ice, pressure increases steadily. Combined with darkness, pressure influences how organisms develop their physical structures. Skeletons become lighter or disappear. Membranes adjust to remain flexible. Proteins adapt to functioning conditions that would disrupt or denature most surface proteins. These changes don't happen quickly. They require long periods of stability. Because the environment remains consistent for thousands of years, the organisms have had enough time to make these adjustments. Darkness alone would be challenging, but darkness paired with extreme pressure produces life forms with traits that seem unusual when compared to open ocean creatures. Temperature adds another layer of difficulty. In these waters, temperatures remain just below freezing, but salt content prevents the water from solidifying. The creatures must keep their internal fluids from freezing, which is why many of them produce compounds that act like antifreeze. These molecules prevent ice crystals from forming inside their cells. The steady temperature allows them to fine-tune their metabolic rates. They run slowly, only generating the energy they absolutely need. Darkness reinforces this slow pace because it limits food supply. Everything in this system fits into a pattern that values patience and endurance. One of the striking things about this endless night is how organised it becomes when examined closely. Though it seems empty, the water column contains layers of activity. Microbes dominate the lower densities. Slightly larger organisms inhabit regions where they can feed on those microbes without expending too much energy. Fish move across larger spaces but remain cautious, adjusting their positions based on where nutrient flows appear. Each organism uses the darkness to its advantage. The absence of predators that hunt with vision allows some species to spread into areas where they might not survive in other environments. The pressure and cold deter intruders from more temperate regions, leaving these ecosystems with fewer competitors. When scientists drill into different areas of Antarctica's ice shelves, they don't always find the same types of organisms. Darkness remains constant, but the chemical conditions differ. Some regions are rich in iron compounds, others contain methane seeps. Still others hold pockets of mineral-rich sediment carried from earlier geological periods. The organisms adapt specifically to the conditions in their area, creating distinct communities that reflect the chemical landscape. Darkness is the shared feature, but the way life responds to it varies depending on what other conditions accompany it. Camera footage sometimes captures small fish that seem unbothered by the equipment entering their space. They don't scatter in sudden bursts like fish in brighter waters. Their reactions are measured. They turn slowly. They approach cautiously. Their eyes, when present, are often reduced or adapted to detect slight differences in illumination, though they do not rely on light the way surface fish do. Some species have adapted to sense movement or pressure changes instead. Their bodies are built for slow navigation rather than fast escape, because the environment favours calm responses. The darkness prevents sudden threats from approaching unseen, so the fish rely on sensory systems that work independently of light. The endless night also reduces the risk of visual predation. Creatures cannot rely on sight to hunt, so they develop alternate methods. Some use chemical detection to locate prey. Others wait for vibrations. Many are opportunistic feeders, consuming whatever drifts near them rather than actively pursuing it. This strategy keeps their energy output low. They don't chase, they wait. The prey items themselves often drift slowly, moving with currents or settling on surfaces that hold microbial films. The system runs on minimal energy input. Darkness isn't a limitation here. It's a structural part of the environment that shapes every interaction. Humans tend to associate darkness with danger or the unknown, but in these waters, darkness is normal. It provides consistency. That consistency allows small changes to matter greatly. When a new nutrient source enters the system, such as a mineral deposit carried by shifting currents, it influences microbial growth. That change spreads gradually upward through the food system. The lack of light means these changes occur without visual cues, but the organisms respond through slower signals that align with their sensory adaptations. The ecosystem stays balanced because everything responds at a pace suited to the environment. While the idea of endless night may sound forbidding, the organisms beneath the ice function well within it. They do not rely on sunlight for warmth or orientation. They do not need rapid movements or bright colours. They rely on structure, stability, and small gradients in chemicals or water flow. The simplicity of the environment reduces the range of possible survival strategies, but the strategies that work are effective. These creatures demonstrate that life does not require ideal conditions to persist. It only needs conditions that remain consistent long enough for adaptation to occur. The stability of the darkness also encourages the development of long lifespans. Some organisms beneath the ice grow slowly enough that their lifespans extend far beyond those of related species in more dynamic environments. Slow growth reduces the need for frequent reproduction. Each generation carries the traits that work in the environment without the pressure for rapid change. This slow pace helps maintain the ecosystem over long periods. The absence of dramatic fluctuations in light, temperature, and nutrient input contributes to this consistency. The longer we consider this environment, the more we see that the endless night is not a void. It's a complete world with its own structure and rhythm. The creatures that live there don't just tolerate darkness. They function within it as naturally as surface organisms function in sunlight. Darkness becomes a medium through which their survival strategies make sense. The lack of visual information encourages sensory systems that feel unfamiliar to us, but are entirely appropriate for the conditions. As we continue exploring this frozen realm, the next step is to look at how this dark environment supports an entire sea, sealed beneath the ice. A sea that remains active even without sunlight. It exists quietly but steadily, allowing life to move through it in ways that reflect the long history of adaptation that has shaped every organism there. The sea sealed beneath Antarctica's ice has existed in isolation for such a long time that it feels more like a separate world than a hidden extension of the one we already know. The surface appearance of Antarctica suggests stillness, but beneath that frozen layer lies a body of water that continues to circulate, shift, and support living systems despite the extreme conditions above it. When scientists speak about this trapped sea, they describe it not as a static space, but as a region with its own structure, currents, and chemical gradients, shaped by a combination of pressure, temperature, sediment flow, and extremely slow exchanges with the surrounding Southern Ocean. The ice cover makes it easy to imagine a silent and motionless environment, yet the reality contains subtle movements and ongoing processes that allow life to stay active, even if at a slower rate than life in more familiar marine regions. This sea remains liquid because of a balance between pressure and geothermal heat. Even though the air above can drop far below freezing, the water beneath the ice stays just cold enough not to solidify. The weight of the ice pushes down on it, lowering the freezing point and keeping the water in a liquid state. Heat from Earth's interior rises through the seabed, contributing just enough warmth to maintain fluid conditions. This combination creates a steady environment where life has had time to adjust itself to extremely low temperatures and negligible light. If the water froze solid, the ecosystem would collapse, but instead it holds steady, allowing life to continue in conditions that remain predictable over very long periods. When researchers drill through the ice to reach this sea, they expect to encounter limited biodiversity. Instead, they often find that the water supports a surprising range of organisms, each adapted to the chemical and physical conditions in its particular region. The sea isn't uniform. Some parts contain higher concentrations of minerals carried by slow-moving currents. Other areas accumulate sediments that release compounds used by microorganisms. The distribution of nutrients varies across the water column. This patchwork of microenvironments creates opportunities for different species to find niches that support their survival. Even though the sea is covered by ice, it functions much like a normal marine system, but at a slower pace and with fewer available energy sources. A large portion of the life in this sea begins with microorganisms that form the foundation for the food web. These microbes do not rely on sunlight. Instead, they use chemical reactions involving minerals in the water or sediments. One example involves bacteria that oxidize iron compounds carried by currents moving beneath the ice. Others feed on reduced sulfur compounds or methane that rises from the seabed. These processes release energy slowly but consistently, allowing microbial populations to form thin layers on surfaces like rocks, ice walls, or suspended sediments. These films might look insignificant, but they act as the starting point for every other organism in the ecosystem. Small crustaceans inhabit regions where these microbial mats form. They graze on them just as herbivorous animals graze on plants in more familiar environments. The crustaceans' bodies are adapted to digest slow-growing microorganisms. Their movements reflect the need to conserve energy. Instead of darting quickly from one location to another, they move steadily, stopping often to feed. Over time, these creatures form local communities that depend on a balance between microbial growth and grazing. If they consume too much, the food source would disappear, so natural selection favours individuals that use energy sparingly. Larger invertebrates appear in places where sediments settle. Some species sift through fine particles on the seabed. Others attach themselves to surfaces where water flow brings suspended organic material. Because the sea beneath the ice receives little fresh organic matter from the surface, these organisms depend on slow but steady mineral and chemical inputs from the seabed. Their feeding strategies reflect this. They filter small particles instead of capturing larger prey. Their bodies become streamlined for minimal movement, with soft tissues that function effectively at low temperatures and high pressures. The fish that live in this sealed sea offer some of the clearest examples of long-term adaptation. Their metabolic systems allow them to function at temperatures that would slow or halt the activity of surface fish. They produce proteins that prevent ice formation within their cells. Their circulatory systems remain efficient even when the water temperature approaches freezing. Their sensory systems emphasize vibration detection and pressure changes over vision. In some species, eyes are reduced but still present, while in others they become almost vestigial. These fish navigate slowly, adjusting their position based on water movement rather than chasing prey across long distances. Some larger animals, such as amphipods, thrive in areas where the sea interacts with ice shelves. These regions contain narrow channels where the pressure shifts and currents move unpredictably. Amphipods use these channels to locate drifting organic material. Their bodies are well suited to handling the turbulence without expending unnecessary energy. They cling to surfaces or crawl across ice formations, feeding on whatever passes within reach. The stability of their environment allows them to grow at rates that might seem slow compared to relatives in the open ocean, but the consistency of the conditions supports survival over longer timescales. When scientists explore subglacial seas, they often notice an interesting pattern. The deeper the isolation, the more specialized the organisms appear. In regions where the sea remains connected to the wider ocean, even if only through narrow passages, researchers find species that resemble open ocean fish, or invertebrates. These species adapt over time but retain many features of their relatives elsewhere. In contrast, areas that have been isolated for longer periods contain organisms with more unique characteristics. They may be smaller, slower, or more dependent on chemical energy sources. Their genetic patterns reflect long periods of separation and gradual adaptation to local conditions. This sea locked beneath the ice supports life forms that have avoided many of the pressures common in open waters. Predation exists, but it functions differently. Without visual hunting, predators rely on chemical cues or vibrations. This limits the distance at which they can detect prey. As a result, prey organisms evolve slower movement rather than fast escape responses. Their strategies involve minimizing detection rather than fleeing quickly. This balance shapes the ecosystem. Even predatory species conserve energy. They wait rather than chase. They respond to steady cues rather than rapid stimuli. Another interesting aspect of this sea is the way it interacts with the underside of the ice. Microbial films form on ice walls, creating food sources for small organisms. Some microbes even incorporate minerals from the ice itself. As water moves along the ice boundary, these films slowly change shape, adjusting to nutrient availability. Small invertebrates graze along these surfaces, taking advantage of the stable structure. Because ice remains in place for long periods, these boundary regions act like fixed feeding grounds. They serve as consistent sources of nutrients in an environment where consistency is rare. Occasionally, scientists find evidence that larger animals from the open ocean have ventured beneath the ice. These visitors appear when cracks or openings allow them to slip through. They may explore the area briefly before returning to open water. Some remain long enough to feed on local species, but few stay permanently. The conditions are too specialized for most outsiders to adapt quickly. Their presence, however, demonstrates that the sea beneath the ice is not entirely isolated. Small exchanges occur, bringing new genes, nutrients, or species into the system. These exchanges might be rare, but over long timescales they contribute to the ongoing evolution of the ecosystem. The most surprising discoveries often involve microorganisms found in the deepest parts of the sea. These microbes survive in complete darkness, under high pressure, and at temperatures near freezing. They obtain energy from chemical reactions that occur slowly but reliably. Some metabolize hydrogen compounds, others use carbon dioxide or trace metals. Their ability to function in these conditions expands our understanding of what life can tolerate. They don't require oxygen in the amounts familiar to surface organisms. They don't need sunlight or rapid growth rates. They form communities that operate slowly but effectively, sustaining themselves through gradual chemical processes. These microorganisms also help stabilize the ecosystem by cycling nutrients. When an organism dies, microbes break down its tissues, releasing compounds that others can use. Even in a cold, dark sea, decomposition continues at a pace that matches the environment. This recycling prevents the accumulation of waste and maintains a supply of nutrients for new generations of organisms. It's a system that mirrors those found in other parts of the world, but functions under far more restrictive conditions. The sea beneath the ice shows that life doesn't need abundant resources to persist. It needs conditions that stay relatively steady for long enough to allow adaptation. Once organisms settle into the rhythm of this environment, they build communities that endure for thousands of years. The lack of sudden changes allows even small populations to survive with minimal energy input. Every creature fits into a structure that remains balanced, because the environment itself rarely shifts in dramatic ways. When researchers use remotely operated vehicles to explore this sea, they often observe organisms that move as though everything around them has time to unfold. Nothing appears rushed because nothing needs to be rushed. The creatures follow a slow pace that suits their world. Their movements reveal how well they have adapted to the sealed environment beneath the ice. They drift, cling, feed, and interact in ways that reflect a long history of survival in a place where energy is scarce and stability is essential. Considering all of this, the sea beneath Antarctica's ice functions as a complex but steady environment where life has learned to take advantage of every opportunity. Its creatures reveal what living systems can accomplish when given enough time and consistency. The next stage is to look more closely at the specific organisms that have adapted to survive where sunlight never reaches, exploring how they thrive in a space that challenges almost every assumption we normally associate with life in the ocean. Life that persists where sunlight never arrives operates under rules that feel unusual when compared to ecosystems shaped by brightness and surface weather. Once the last traces of natural light fade and the icy ceiling seals everything below it, the only creatures that endure are those that have reshaped their biology to work with the limited cues available. Instead of relying on sight, warm temperatures, or rapid food cycles, they depend on chemical signals, faint movements in the water, and slow but dependable energy sources produced by microorganisms. This environment strips away many of the strategies used by life elsewhere, leaving only those that can function without visual guidance or abundant energy. The organisms that occupy this space do not compete for sunlight or colour for display. They survive because they have found ways to use the conditions available rather than resist them. One of the most important groups in this lightless world is made up of microorganisms that can process chemical compounds found in the water or sediments. These microbes do not need photosynthesis. Instead, they draw energy from minerals such as iron or sulfur, or from gases like methane and ammonia. They occupy surfaces that provide stable anchor points, including rocks, ice walls, and sediment layers. Their growth forms thin sheets that look unremarkable, yet these sheets support entire communities of slightly larger organisms. Microbes multiply slowly in this environment because the reactions they depend on occur at reduced rates due to low temperatures. Even so, they maintain a consistent presence, renewing themselves gradually and providing an important resource for others. The next animals in this system are often small crustaceans that graze on microbial films. These crustaceans cannot rely on sight, so they use chemical receptors to detect the presence of microbial communities. They move deliberately, stopping often to feed. Their energy consumption matches the limited food supply. If they moved quickly, they would burn more energy than they could regain, so their bodies are designed for measured activity. Some species have elongated antennae that help them sense chemical trails left by microbes or other animals. Others possess short but sensitive appendages that register small shifts in water movement. Their behaviour reflects an environment where efficiency is essential. Also present in these dark waters are amphipods, which fill various ecological roles depending on their size and feeding strategies. Some species graze on microbial films in the same way as other small crustaceans. Others scavenge, feeding on particles that drift downward or settle into sediment layers. Amphipods can survive long periods without food because they have slow metabolisms that match the low temperature and reduced resource availability. Their bodies contain proteins that keep their tissues functional even when the water approaches freezing. Some species tolerate pressure levels that would challenge most surface organisms. These traits make amphipods successful in the extreme conditions beneath the ice. Fish living in this lightless environment demonstrate some of the most striking evolutionary adjustments. Many produce antifreeze proteins that prevent ice crystal formation inside their cells. These proteins allow their blood to circulate without freezing, even when the surrounding water remains below the normal freezing point of fresh water. Their internal chemistry stays stable despite the cold, ensuring that their enzymes function at low temperatures. Their bodies also maintain flexibility under pressure. As the water deepens, pressure increases, which can interfere with cell structure and protein function in species not adapted to such conditions. The fish here have physiological systems that remain steady under these pressures, allowing them to swim slowly across various parts of the under-ice sea. Some fish species possess reduced eyesight, or none at all. Instead of relying on vision, they detect movement and pressure changes through lateral line systems. These systems allow them to sense even slight disturbances in the water, helping them navigate and locate prey. Their feeding strategies reflect the scarcity of food. Instead of chasing prey over long distances, they wait until something drifts near them or moves slowly enough for them to capture it with minimal effort. This approach reduces energy loss. It suits the conditions because energy intake opportunities are spaced far apart. Brittle stars and other echinoderms appear in some parts of the under-ice system, typically in regions where sediments accumulate. They feed on an organic material that settles on the seafloor. Their bodies are built to move across soft sediments without disturbing them too much. They use tube-like structures to locate food particles and carry them into their mouths. Their feeding is unhurried, which matches the slow rate at which food becomes available. Because the environment remains steady over long periods, these organisms can survive extended intervals with limited nourishment. Sponges sometimes occupy rocky surfaces in deeper regions. Their porous bodies filter water constantly, capturing small particles, bacteria, and organic fragments. In an environment where water circulation is slow, sponges rely on subtle currents to carry nourishment through their bodies. Their tissues contain compounds that prevent freezing and maintain flexibility. Sponges grow slowly, sometimes remaining in place for decades. Their gradual growth rate suits an environment where food availability does not spike suddenly, but arrives evenly over long spans. Various worm species also contribute to life in this ecosystem. Some burrow through sediments, aerating the substrate and redistributing nutrients. Others attach to hard surfaces and filter small particles from the water. Their bodies maintain functionality in low temperatures, and their reproductive cycles adjust to the availability of food. Many release larvae that drift until they locate suitable environments. These larvae often possess chemical receptors that detect microbial communities, ensuring that they settle where food is present. Worm species that rely on filtering suspended particles benefit from occasional pulses of nutrient-rich water, but they continue functioning even during extended low-food intervals. The community also includes organisms that specialize in breaking down dead material. These decomposers play a major role in recycling nutrients. When a fish or invertebrate dies, microbes and small scavengers dismantle the carcass, releasing compounds that other organisms use. This process occurs slowly because of the cold temperatures, yet it remains consistent. The recycling of nutrients ensures that each generation of organisms has access to the chemicals they need for maintenance and growth. Decomposition under the ice does not produce the strong odours or rapid breakdown seen in warmer environments. Instead, it progresses gradually, with each small step contributing to the continuity of the ecosystem. Some of the most unusual organisms found beneath the ice are those capable of chemosynthesis. While photosynthetic organisms rely on sunlight, chemosynthetic organisms extract energy from chemical reactions. This provides the foundation for entire communities in a place where sunlight cannot penetrate. Chemosynthetic bacteria often live in association with other organisms. Some invertebrates host these bacteria in their tissues, allowing the bacteria to produce nutrients internally. This form of symbiosis reduces the need for external food sources. It works well in environments where resources are limited and scattered. Another group that thrives in these dark waters includes microbial extremophils that tolerate conditions considered harmful to most life forms. Some survive in pockets where oxygen levels drop to minimal concentrations. Others live in microenvironments where mineral concentrations reach unusual levels. Their genetic structures often include adaptations that stabilize DNA and proteins at low temperatures. These adaptations help maintain cell function even when metabolic reactions slow significantly. Extremophils demonstrate the remarkable capacity of life to survive in places that seem unsuitable at first glance. Not all organisms in this environment live year-round in complete darkness. Some inhabit zones that occasionally receive faint traces of filtered light, although not enough for photosynthesis. Even these organisms rely primarily on chemical energy sources. Light plays almost no role in their survival. They function in a way that reflects their dependence on steady chemical reactions rather than fluctuating light cycles. Their internal clocks align with environmental cues unrelated to sunlight, such as temperature shifts or chemical conditions. When considering how these creatures manage to thrive without sunlight, it becomes clear that energy flow determines everything. Instead of a rapid chain reaction powered by sunlight at the surface, energy here enters the system slowly. Microbes convert chemical energy into biomass. Small grazers feed on them. Larger animals feed on the grazers. Decomposers recycle nutrients. The entire structure operates at a controlled pace. The absence of sunlight removes the possibility of fast growth or sudden population explosions. Every organism follows a slow trajectory, shaped by an environment that discourages rapid change. Even though the creatures here seem strange from a surface perspective, they follow predictable patterns. Their bodies reflect long-term adaptation. Their behavior matches the conditions of low energy, low temperature, and steady darkness. They do not appear fragile despite their environment. They appear specialized. Each trait they possess solves a specific problem created by the absence of sunlight. Freezing temperatures do not hinder them. Pressure does not limit them. Darkness does not confuse them. They survive because they have learned to use strategies that make sense in their world. What stands out most when examining these organisms is the stability of their interactions. Surface environments often experience rapid shifts. Storms, seasonal changes, variations in sunlight intensity. These changes influence feeding cycles, reproduction, and population dynamics. Under the ice, conditions remain constant. Temperature varies only slightly. Darkness stays the same. Nutrient input fluctuates modestly but not dramatically. This stability shapes long-term evolutionary patterns. It does not encourage sudden innovation. Instead, it rewards slow refinement. The organisms that thrive here do so because they fit the environment closely. Some creatures even use the cold to their advantage. Low temperatures reduce metabolic demands. This means the organisms do not need as much energy to maintain basic functions. They can survive long periods without food. Their tissues remain stable. Their proteins do not degrade rapidly. Their energy storage lasts longer than it would in warmer environments. In this sense, the cold becomes a supportive feature rather than an obstacle. It slows everything to a pace that aligns with the limited resources available. The collection of organisms that survive where sunlight dies gives a clearer picture of how adaptable life can be when given enough time. They reveal that survival does not depend on thriving in ideal conditions. It depends on finding a way to match what the environment offers. These creatures succeed because they have shaped themselves into forms that rely on slow processes and reliable cues, rather than rapid responses or high energy intake. Their presence demonstrates that ecosystems can develop even when a major driver of surface life, sunlight, is absent. This system functions on a different foundation, but it does function, and it maintains a structure that supports numerous species. As the picture of these organisms becomes clearer, the next step is to understand how microorganisms form the basis for this entire network, creating stable communities that supply the energy needed for everything else. Their work begins long before any larger creature arrives, and their influence shapes the entire environment beneath the ice in ways that continue to unfold as researchers learn more about them. Life beneath Antarctica's ice does not begin with fish, crustaceans, or anything large enough to cast a shadow. It begins with microorganisms that organise themselves into structures far more complex than their individual cells would suggest. These organisms build communities that function like small cities, each one using chemical cues, nutrients, and available surfaces to create networks that persist even when the surrounding environment shifts at an extremely slow pace. While these communities remain invisible to the naked eye, they form the backbone of every food source in the under-ice sea. Without them, nothing else would have a reliable way to obtain energy. Their existence proves that even in a place where sunlight does not reach, stability can arise from processes that depend entirely on chemical reactions rather than light. These microbial communities appear in many forms. Some grow on rocks or sediment layers. Others adhere to the underside of the ice, forming thin films that spread gradually as nutrients drift past. Still others form free-floating aggregates that resemble fine particles suspended in the water. Each type uses the resources available in its specific location. Microbes anchored to surfaces can take advantage of chemical elements released from the rock or trapped in ice. Those suspended in the water rely on dissolved minerals carried by slow-moving currents. Regardless of the setting, the pattern remains consistent. These microbes convert chemical compounds into usable energy, creating the foundation for the rest of the ecosystem. One of the most common energy sources they use comes from the oxidation of iron, sulfur, or ammonia. The water beneath the ice contains small amounts of these compounds, often carried upward from the ocean floor or released when sediments shift. Even though the concentrations are low, the microbes have evolved mechanisms that allow them to extract energy efficiently from these materials. They work at a lower rate than microbes in warmer environments, but the steady nature of the under-ice conditions makes slow growth sustainable. Their ability to function in cold temperatures comes from proteins that remain active even when chemical reactions slow significantly. These proteins stay flexible enough to perform their tasks without becoming rigid or breaking down. Communities located on the underside of the ice display behaviours that make them particularly well suited for their environment. The ice provides a stable surface that does not shift quickly. As a result, microbial films can remain in place for long periods. When water circulates beneath the ice, minerals and organic molecules drift past, allowing the microbes to absorb them gradually. Over time, these films thicken, forming layers that support additional microbial species. Some organisms specialize in breaking down organic matter that settles from above. Others focus on converting inorganic compounds into energy. These different functions allow the films to act as small ecosystems within the larger environment. Sediment-based communities develop in a slightly different manner. Instead of relying on the underside of the ice for structure, they grow on fine particles that accumulate on the sea floor or settle on rocky surfaces. These sediments often contain traces of organic material or minerals that have been trapped there for long periods. Microbes that inhabit these areas can access these materials by forming dense clusters. Their metabolic activity gradually breaks down the sediments, releasing nutrients that other organisms can use. This process moves slowly, but the stability of the environment allows the communities to continue functioning even when new nutrient input is limited. One of the key advantages microbes have in this setting is their ability to form biofilms. A biofilm is a structured layer of cells held together by substances the microbes produce. These substances act like a glue. anchoring the microbes to surfaces and protecting them from currents that might otherwise carry them away. The biofilm also provides a controlled environment where chemical gradients remain stable. This allows the community to perform metabolic functions more efficiently than the individual free-floating cells could. In areas where conditions remain consistent, biofilms can persist for years, growing thicker and more complex over time. In some parts of the under-ice environment, microbes form mats that appear similar to thin carpets when examined under magnification. These mats consist of multiple layers, each one serving a different role. The upper layers often contain organisms that use available oxidizing compounds, while the lower layers contain microbes that break down organic matter or interact with mineral surfaces. The layering allows different metabolic processes to occur simultaneously. Because light is absent, these mats do not rely on photosynthesis. Instead, they operate through chemical interactions that release enough energy to keep the community stable. Researchers studying subglacial lakes often encounter microbial communities that have adapted to extreme isolation. These lakes may contain water that has not mixed with the ocean for millions of years. As a result, the microbes in these systems have evolved to operate under conditions very different from those found elsewhere. They rely heavily on chemical reactions involving minerals in the water or sediments. Some use hydrogen gas produced by geological processes. Others obtain energy from the slow breakdown of organic molecules trapped in the lake long ago. These organisms are often small and slow-growing, but they maintain consistent populations because the environment remains predictable. The complexity of these microbial communities becomes apparent when scientists analyze their genetic material. Even though the organisms may appear similar under a microscope, their genetic sequences reveal a wide range of metabolic capabilities. Some microbes can switch between different energy sources depending on what is available. Others specialize in processing specific compounds. This diversity allows the communities to adjust to small changes in the environment without collapsing. If one type of energy source becomes scarce, microbes that rely on another source can continue functioning, ensuring that the basic processes needed for the ecosystem continue uninterrupted. Microbial communities also interact with larger organisms in ways that are essential for the stability of the ecosystem. Small crustaceans graze on biofilms, scraping away layers of microbes as they feed. These grazing activities help regulate microbial growth, preventing the films from becoming too thick. At the same time, the microbes benefit from this interaction because grazing exposes fresh surfaces that allow new growth. Larger organisms, such as fish, rely on the grazers for food. In this way, microbial communities indirectly support animals several steps higher in the food system. Another important role microbes play involves nutrient cycling. When organisms die, their tissues break down slowly in the cold water. Microbial decomposers handle much of this process, converting organic matter into simpler compounds. These compounds then become available to other microorganisms that incorporate them into new biomass. This cycle continues over long periods, ensuring that nutrients do not accumulate in unusable forms. Even though decomposition occurs more slowly than in warmer environments, the steady nature of the under-ice system allows the cycle to remain balanced. Chemical interactions within microbial communities also influence the surrounding water. Some microbes produce acidic or alkaline byproducts, which can alter the pH of small areas. These changes affect the solubility of minerals and the availability of certain compounds. Over time, these small adjustments contribute to the structure of the ecosystem. The environment beneath the ice does not experience sudden shifts, so even minor chemical changes can have noticeable effects. Microbial communities shape their surroundings gradually, reinforcing conditions that support their continued growth. Some communities form near hydrothermal sources that lie deep beneath the ice. In these areas, warm water rises from geothermal activity, carrying minerals that serve as energy sources for microbes. These communities often resemble those found near deep-sea vents, though on a smaller scale. The microbes in these areas use the chemicals released from the seabed to generate energy. They create dense clusters that attract small grazers. The presence of even a small amount of geothermal activity can significantly increase local biodiversity by providing additional energy sources. Microbial communities also form in regions where ice melts slowly. Meltwater contains trapped minerals that become available when the ice dissolves. Microbes take advantage of these minerals and begin forming clusters on nearby surfaces. These clusters expand gradually as more meltwater passes through. Over time, these areas become hotspots for microbial activity, supporting larger populations of grazers and other organisms that rely on the microbial biomass. An interesting aspect of these communities is their ability to communicate through chemical signals. While they do not communicate in the sense that larger animals do, they release molecules that allow them to coordinate certain behaviours. These signals can trigger responses such as the formation of biofilms, the adjustment of metabolic rates, or the activation of protective mechanisms. This form of communication helps maintain order within the community. It ensures that the organisms function together rather than competing in ways that would destabilize the environment. The structure of these microbial cities becomes more apparent when researchers study their physical patterns. Under magnification, biofilms display repeating formations that reflect the way nutrients move through the water. Channels form within the films, allowing water to circulate. These channels supply the microbes with oxygen or minerals. They also remove waste products. The layout resembles a network that distributes resources efficiently. Although not intentionally designed, the arrangement results from the way microbes grow in response to their environment. Microbial communities are not static. They respond to changes in nutrient availability, temperature, and water flow. If a new source of minerals enters the system, communities may expand rapidly for a period before returning to slower growth. If water movement becomes restricted, the structure of the biofilm may adjust itself accordingly. These changes occur gradually because of the low temperatures, but they demonstrate that the communities remain flexible enough to survive under different conditions. When researchers extract samples of these communities, they often find that microbes from different regions beneath the ice share similar traits. This suggests that the extreme environment encourages the evolution of comparable adaptations. At the same time, subtle genetic differences reveal that each community has developed solutions tailored to its specific location. The combination of shared adaptations and unique traits illustrates how life can diversify even when the environment appears uniform at first glance. The influence of microbial communities extends beyond their own needs. They establish the foundation for the entire ecosystem. Grazers depend on them. Predators depend on the grazers. Decomposers rely on the organic matter produced by all of these groups. The continuity of life beneath the ice hinges on the ability of microbes to maintain stable populations. Their work does not require sunlight or abundant nutrients. It requires steady conditions, which the under-ice sea provides. As these communities continue to support larger organisms, they create a chain of interactions that connects the smallest living structures to the most noticeable animals in the environment. Their presence turns a cold, dark sea into a functioning ecosystem. The next part of this journey involves moving toward the larger creatures that drift through these waters, examining how their existence depends on the structures built by the microbes long before they arrived. In the deeper regions beneath Antarctica's ice, where pressure increases steadily and temperatures approach the lowest point at which water can remain liquid, larger creatures move with a quiet presence that makes them seem almost weightless. They drift through these dark spaces with bodies shaped by long periods of adaptation, relying on sensory systems that detect faint changes in water pressure or chemical cues rather than relying on sight. These organisms feel unusually large for a place that offers little energy, yet they persist because they have developed strategies that allow them to survive with minimal input. Their size does not come from rapid growth or abundant resources. Instead, it results from slow, steady processes that unfold over long spans of time. These creatures may look imposing in comparison to the microorganisms and small grazers around them, but their movements reflect the same careful pacing that defines the entire environment beneath the ice. Many of these larger animals grow more slowly than their relatives in open water. The cold temperature reduces metabolic rates, allowing them to conserve energy and extend their lifespans. This slow pace gives them time to accumulate size despite the limited availability of food. They feed on small crustaceans, drifting particles, or anything that moves close enough to capture without expending excessive effort. They rarely chase prey. Instead, they wait for the movement to come to them. Their bodies show traits that make this strategy effective, such as broad sensory surfaces, flexible appendages, and internal systems that use energy efficiently. These adaptations create organisms that appear calm and deliberate, rather than swift or aggressive. One example of these larger inhabitants is the giant amphipod. In more temperate regions, amphipods are usually small, often only a few millimeters long. Under the Antarctic ice, however, some species reach lengths that surprise researchers. The exact reason for their size remains a subject of study, but several factors contribute to the pattern. Low temperatures slow cellular processes, which can lead to longer lifespans and extended growth periods. Limited predation pressure allows individuals to reach sizes they might not achieve in more competitive environments. The stability of the under-ice habitat eliminates the need for rapid responses to environmental changes, enabling them to invest energy in slow, incremental growth. These amphipods do not behave aggressively despite their size. They move carefully, using their segmented bodies to navigate along ice surfaces or across the seafloor. They feed on microbial films, small detritus, or dead organisms that settle into their reach. Their feeding strategies rely on steady, continuous contact rather than rapid bursts of motion. This approach matches the slow rate at which food becomes available. The amphipod's size gives them a broader range of sensory input, allowing them to detect faint chemical traces that guide them to feeding sites. Their legs and antennae help them explore surfaces without expending unnecessary energy. Other large creatures found in these subglacial waters include certain species of isopods. Like amphipods, isopods in the under-ice environment reach sizes far larger than their surface counterparts. They inhabit areas where the seafloor accumulates fine sediments. Their flattened bodies allow them to move through narrow gaps in the substrate. Their slow, deliberate manners of locomotion reduce energy loss. They feed on decaying material or microbial mats, using their mouthparts to sift through sediments. Over time, their steady intake supports gradual growth. The isopod's large size may also provide advantages in dealing with pressure or reducing heat loss, which helps them remain functional in a challenging environment. Some species of sea spiders also exhibit increased size beneath the Antarctic ice. These creatures are not true spiders, though their long legs and small central bodies give them a similar appearance. Their legs allow them to walk across the seafloor or ice surfaces, covering more distance with less effort. Their respiratory systems differ from those of the insects and arachnids on land. They absorb oxygen directly through their legs, which works efficiently in cold, oxygen-rich water. Their size allows for greater surface area, which supports this method of respiration. Sea spiders feed on slow-moving or stationary organisms such as sponges, hydroids, or small invertebrates. The under-ice environment suits their feeding style because many of their prey species grow steadily without sudden movements. Another group of larger organisms includes certain species of fish that have adapted to the extreme conditions beneath the ice. Some of these fish lack hemoglobin, the molecule that typically transports oxygen in blood. Instead, they use near-clear blood plasma that functions adequately because the cold water contains high levels of dissolved oxygen. Their bodies rely on enhanced circulation to deliver oxygen throughout their tissues. This adaptation reduces the energy required for producing hemoglobin, allowing the fish to allocate resources toward other physiological needs. These fish move slowly, using their fins to adjust their positions in the water without producing disruptive motions. Their size varies depending on their food sources, but some species grow to lengths that classify them among the more noticeable inhabitants. These fish often display pale bodies because pigmentation offers little advantage in darkness. Their skin remains smooth and flexible, helping them tolerate pressure changes. Their sensory systems focus on detecting subtle pressure variations. They do not rely on vision, though some species retain small eyes that register faint differences in illumination from equipment brought by researchers. Their feeding patterns are selective, often involving ambush techniques that rely on patience rather than speed. They choose locations where small organisms drift naturally, then remain still until something enters their range. In some regions, larger invertebrates such as anemones and sponges anchor themselves to rocky surfaces or ice walls. These organisms do not move from place to place, but their size makes them significant members of the ecosystem. Anemones extend their tentacles to capture drifting particles or small animals that pass close enough. Their slow metabolism allows them to survive long intervals between feeding events. Sponges filter water continuously, drawing in particles and microorganisms. Their simple structure functions effectively in cold conditions. Their growth reflects the steady availability of suspended particles rather than rapid bursts of nutrient input. Some sponges reach impressive sizes over decades, becoming stable fixtures in the environment. Even though these creatures can be large, they do not dominate the ecosystem in a way that disrupts the balance. Their size is a product of slow, consistent growth rather than rapid expansion. They coexist with smaller organisms, forming networks that rely on mutual stability. Their presence adds structural complexity to the environment, offering surfaces or hiding places for smaller creatures. Their feeding habits influence nutrient distribution. Their bodies, when they eventually die, introduce significant organic material that microbes and scavengers gradually process. Everything they do fits into the slow rhythm of the under-ice world. Some of the more unusual large organisms found beneath the ice include long, ribbon-like invertebrates that drift with currents. These animals possess flexible bodies that move in response to subtle water motions. Their size allows them to capture small particles across a wide area. They do not rely on speed. Instead, they use their bodies as passive collectors. Their tissues contain compounds that remain functional in the cold. Their internal systems operate slowly but reliably. They feed on whatever material moves close enough, allowing them to sustain themselves without expending much energy. Researchers also occasionally observe larger predators that move through the under-ice waters, though these creatures appear less frequently than smaller grazers. Some of these predators use chemical receptors to detect prey. Their bodies contain well-developed sensory systems that help them locate food despite the darkness. They move with more purpose than the grazers, but they still conserve energy by minimizing unnecessary motion. Their size allows them to cover more distance without expending excessive amounts of energy. They may feed on smaller fish, amphipods, or other invertebrates. Their predatory role contributes to population control and nutrient cycling, ensuring that the ecosystem remains balanced. It is important to note that being large in this environment does not mean being dominant in the way dominance is understood in more dynamic ecosystems. The under-ice world discourages rapid competition. The creatures that succeed do so by matching the pace of the environment. Their size does not come from aggression or rapid feeding. It comes from patience and long-term adaptation. They move slowly, consume carefully, and interact with their surroundings in ways that avoid unnecessary energy loss. Their presence reinforces the idea that life can achieve size even when resources are limited, as long as the conditions remain stable enough for growth to occur over time. Large organisms beneath the ice often display unusual features that reflect the specific pressures of their habitat. Some possess thicker outer structures that protect their internal tissues from pressure changes. Others have expanded body cavities that help distribute pressure evenly. Their circulatory systems often adapt to ensure steady nutrient flow, even when metabolic rates slow considerably. Their muscles function at low temperatures without becoming stiff. Their reproductive strategies often involve producing fewer offspring, each with higher survival rates, because the environment cannot support large numbers of rapidly growing juveniles. These strategies align with the reality that growth and reproduction must occur carefully. The presence of these ghostly giants reveals much about the stability of the underice world. If the environment were prone to sudden shifts, large creatures would struggle to survive. Their growth depends on predictability. Temperature, pressure, and nutrient availability must remain within ranges that allow for slow development. These conditions have persisted long enough for large-bodied organisms to evolve and maintain their presence. This indicates that the subglacial oceans are not chaotic spaces. They are controlled environments shaped by geological forces such as ice movement, mineral input, and geothermal activity. These factors combine to create habitats that support organisms across a wide range of sizes. The study of these larger inhabitants helps researchers understand how ecosystems function in extreme environments. Their traits illustrate the various ways life adapts when common requirements, such as sunlight or warm temperatures, are absent. Their behaviour demonstrates how survival can depend on strategies that prioritise energy conservation. Their growth patterns show how organisms can thrive over long periods when conditions remain stable. These lessons extend beyond Antarctica. They apply to potential ecosystems on icy moons or other planets with subsurface oceans, where light may never penetrate. While these ghostly giants appear striking against the backdrop of darkness and ice, their existence depends on the foundation laid by the microbial communities that occupy every surface. Their size becomes possible only because smaller organisms provide the energy that sustains them. The next part of this exploration leads into a closer examination of the invertebrates that share this space, focusing on how they use their unique traits to survive in a sea that remains cold, dark, and consistent year after year. In the waters sealed beneath Antarctica's ice, invertebrates occupy nearly every available niche, moving through the cold environment with steady rhythms that help them conserve energy while still interacting with the world around them. These animals come in many forms, from small drifting creatures to those anchored on rocks or ice. Their bodies are built to handle cold temperatures, high pressure, and limited food availability. Even though they vary in shape and behaviour, they all rely on strategies that reduce unnecessary energy use. Their movements, feeding patterns, and sensory abilities reflect an environment where slow, measured actions provide the best chance of survival. While none of these animals display dramatic behaviour, their presence brings complexity to the underice world. Their interactions shape how nutrients move through the system and how other organisms adapt. One group that stands out includes the soft-bodied invertebrates that drift steadily with the water. These organisms move by adjusting their density or by using simple contractions that require minimal effort. They do not rush toward food sources. Instead, they encounter food by moving along natural water pathways. Some of them possess faint bioluminescent abilities, producing small pulses of light visible only when researchers bring equipment into the area. These light emissions are not used for communication the way surface organisms use them. They appear to be byproducts of chemical reactions within the animals' bodies. Even though the surrounding darkness prevents the light from serving a clear ecological role, its presence demonstrates that invertebrates can retain certain capabilities despite the lack of sunlight. Many Antarctic invertebrates possess bodies designed to maximize sensory efficiency. In environments without natural light, the ability to detect faint movements becomes critical. Tube-dwelling worms, for example, extend long appendages that register shifts in the water caused by drifting particles or nearby animals. When something approaches, they retract into their tubes to avoid unnecessary contact. Their tubes anchor them to surfaces and provide shelter against pressure changes. The worms' feeding structures collect organic material, small microbes, or suspended particles. They use slow, steady motions that match the pace of the environment. Their bodies are capable of functioning at low temperatures without requiring rapid internal adjustments. Other worms live freely on the sea floor, moving across sediment layers with careful motions. These organisms mostly feed on detritus or microbial films. Their mouth parts are adapted to scrape or ingest thin layers of material from the sediment. The process of feeding is not dramatic. It occurs as a continuous, gradual activity. These worms play a stabilizing role by redistributing fine particles and exposing new surfaces for microbial colonization. Their movements contribute to nutrient recycling, making them important members of the ecosystem despite their small size. Some of the most familiar invertebrates in this ecosystem are crustaceans. They include amphipods, copepods, and various other small species that graze on microbial communities or organic particles. These creatures have bodies suited for cold water, often containing compounds that keep their tissues flexible when temperatures drop. They move in short, controlled bursts rather than long, sustained swims. Their energy use must remain low to match the limited availability of food. These crustaceans rely on antennae and sensory hairs that detect chemical changes in the water, guiding them to feeding sites. Their behaviour remains consistent even when environmental conditions shift gradually. When food becomes scarce, they simply reduce their activity further. One of the interesting aspects of Antarctic invertebrates is their ability to survive long periods with minimal nourishment. Their metabolic rates remain low, allowing them to function on small amounts of energy. During extended intervals of low nutrient availability, they rely on stored energy reserves. Unlike many surface organisms that need frequent feeding to sustain rapid movement or reproduction, the invertebrates beneath the ice are built for endurance. Their bodies tolerate slow energy intake. Their tissues do not degrade quickly. These traits allow them to survive in an environment where food arrives slowly and irregularly. Several species of jelly-like invertebrates also inhabit these waters. They drift with the currents and capture small particles or organisms using tentacles equipped with specialized cells. Their gelatinous bodies require little energy to maintain. Their transparency reduces visibility to predators, although visual predation plays a minor role in this dark environment. They pulse their bodies to move, but the pulsing remains subtle. They avoid excessive movement, allowing the current to handle most of their transportation. Some of these organisms may emit faint glows when disturbed, but their bioluminescence remains minimal, likely serving as a byproduct rather than a functional tool. In regions where the seafloor contains rocky surfaces, invertebrates such as anemones and hydroids attach themselves and extend feeding structures into the water. Their tentacles capture drifting particles without requiring active pursuit. They remain anchored for long periods. The cold water slows their internal processes, giving them the ability to survive with limited feeding opportunities. Their tissues resist freezing because of compounds that keep cell fluids in stable states. Over time, these anchored organisms form small colonies that create structure in areas that might otherwise appear barren. Sea spiders also populate the subglacial waters. Their long legs allow them to move across soft sediments or hard surfaces. They absorb oxygen directly through their limbs, which works effectively in cold water rich in dissolved oxygen. The larger Antarctic species demonstrate how invertebrates can reach impressive sizes under stable environmental conditions. Their bodies handle low temperatures without requiring thick insulation. They feed on sessile organisms such as sponges or hydroids, using long proboscises to extract nutrients. They move with slow, coordinated steps, conserving energy at every stage. Some invertebrates rely on scavenging rather than grazing. These animals locate dead or decaying organisms by detecting chemical signals released during the breakdown process. Because decomposition occurs slowly in cold conditions, carcasses persist for longer periods, giving scavengers more time to locate them. This process contributes to the recycling of nutrients within the ecosystem. Scavengers distribute organic material into smaller fragments, allowing microbes to continue breaking the material down. The cooperation between microbial action and invertebrate scavenging keeps the nutrient cycle moving in a controlled way. There are also soft-bodied organisms that appear rarely in camera footage, but play important roles in the system. These creatures may resemble simple ribbons or flattened shapes. Their feeding strategies often rely on collecting fine particles as they move. Their bodies absorb nutrients through surfaces designed for efficient exchange. Some may produce faint pulses of light when disturbed by the equipment used by researchers, demonstrating biochemical reactions not commonly observed in other cold environments. The light does not spread far in the darkness, and the animals do not use it for signalling. It is simply a natural part of their physiology. Bioluminescence in this ecosystem remains subtle because there is little ecological pressure to develop bright displays. However, some invertebrates can produce faint flashes or glows that appear briefly when stimulated. These reactions do not mimic the complex signalling patterns found in deep-sea species. Instead, they reflect a simpler chemical reaction that occurs when certain compounds interact with oxygen or other molecules. In the darkness beneath the ice, these glows do not attract mates or scare predators. They remain small, private reactions occurring for reasons unrelated to communication or defense. Invertebrates that burrow into the sediments also play important roles. Their tunnels help oxygen penetrate deeper layers of the seafloor, supporting microbial activity in parts of the sediment that would otherwise remain inactive. These burrowing organisms stir the sediment slowly, preventing it from becoming compacted. Their feeding habits bring nutrients from deeper layers to the surface, where other organisms can access them. Their bodies tolerate fluctuations in oxygen levels that occur when they move between layers. They continue their activities without needing to adjust for sudden changes, because the environment shifts so gradually. The reproductive strategies of these invertebrates reflect the constraints of the environment. Many species produce fewer offspring than their relatives in warmer regions. The low temperature slows development. Eggs and larvae drift for extended periods before settling. The larvae rely on stored energy or sparse nutrients in the water. Because of the low predation pressure, a smaller number of offspring can still support population continuity. Larvae often settle in areas where microbial communities thrive, giving them better access to early food sources. When they find suitable surfaces, they attach or begin feeding depending on their species. Invertebrates that feed on microbial mats help regulate the thickness and composition of these communities. Their grazing prevents microbial films from becoming too dense, allowing fresh surfaces to form and maintaining a steady nutrient exchange. Microbes benefit from this modest grazing because it removes waste layers that might limit growth. This interaction demonstrates the interdependence between invertebrates and microbes. Even though invertebrates rely on microbes for food, their presence improves the overall structure of microbial communities. Some invertebrates form seasonal patterns in their activity, although these patterns have little to do with sunlight cycles. Instead, they respond to slow shifts in nutrient flow or temperature that occur over long periods. When nutrient availability increases slightly due to currents bringing new materials, activity rises. When resources decrease, the animals reduce movement and rely on stored energy. These adjustments do not occur quickly. They align with the long-term stability of the environment. Many of the invertebrates beneath the ice possess biochemical traits that protect their tissues from freezing. They produce molecules that prevent ice crystal formation. These substances help maintain the fluid state of internal structures, even when the external temperature remains below the freezing point of fresh water. Their cell membranes contain lipids that remain flexible at low temperatures. Their proteins function reliably without becoming rigid. These adaptations allow them to continue feeding and reproducing even when conditions reach extremes. The presence of invertebrates shapes the under-ice world in ways that become clearer when researchers observe how these organisms interact with the environment. They contribute to nutrient distribution, microbial regulation, and sediment structure. They provide food sources for fish and larger predators. They help maintain a consistent flow of chemical energy through the system. Their behavior may seem subtle, but their influence reaches across the ecosystem. Invertebrates also help researchers understand what life might look like in other cold, dark oceans beyond Earth. Because they thrive in an environment where energy arrives slowly and unpredictably, They offer clues about how organisms might adapt to subsurface oceans on icy moons. Their bodies demonstrate that life can evolve stable physiological systems even when conditions challenge common assumptions about biological requirements. They show that organisms can survive by aligning themselves with the pace set by their environment rather than resisting it. As these animals pulse, drift, graze, filter, and burrow, they demonstrate what long-term survival looks like in an ecosystem limited by cold, darkness, and scarcity. Their traits complement those of the larger organisms around them, creating a layered system in which every species contributes to stability. The next stage of this exploration shifts toward the creatures that have adapted in ways that push the limits of cold tolerance and pressure endurance, revealing how far life can adjust when given enough time and consistent conditions. The environment beneath Antarctica's ice shapes every organism that lives there, with a combination of cold and pressure that would overwhelm most forms of life elsewhere. These conditions create a selective filter that rewards traits allowing for slow, steady survival rather than quick reactions or rapid growth. The creatures that persist in this environment did not develop their features suddenly. They represent long histories of adaptation that produced bodies and behaviours suited to one of the most demanding habitats on Earth. The constant low temperature and the immense weight of the overlying ice work together to influence every aspect of their biology, from how their cells function to how they move, feed, and reproduce. Understanding how these organisms survive requires looking closely at the ways they've reshaped themselves to endure these continuous forces. Cold temperatures slow the chemical reactions that power living systems. For most surface organisms, these slow reactions would disrupt essential processes, but the organisms beneath the ice have found ways to compensate. They produce proteins that remain flexible even when temperatures approach freezing. These proteins work at rates that support life without requiring the heat needed by many species in warmer environments. The cold also affects the fluidity of cell membranes, which would normally stiffen and lose their function at such low temperatures. To avoid this, these organisms incorporate different types of lipids into their membranes. These lipids keep the membranes from becoming rigid, allowing essential molecules to move in and out of cells as needed. Some species produce antifreeze compounds that prevent ice crystals from forming in their tissues. Ice formation inside cells can rupture membranes and disrupt internal structures, making survival impossible. Antifreeze proteins prevent crystals from growing by binding to ice structures and halting their expansion. These proteins work efficiently even at low concentrations, allowing organisms to maintain internal stability. In this environment, the absence of ice inside tissues is not just helpful but necessary. Without these adaptations, even slight temperature drops could become fatal. Pressure shapes these organisms just as significantly as cold does. As the depth increases, pressure rises to levels that can compress cell structures or interfere with protein shape. Many organisms beneath the ice evolve internal features that help them withstand this force. Their cell membranes remain flexible enough to handle compression. Their proteins maintain stable shapes even under pressure. Some species contain compounds that stabilize proteins by limiting structural changes. These adjustments allow essential processes, such as enzyme reactions, to continue without disruption. The creatures do not simply tolerate pressure, they function normally in conditions that would disable many surface organisms. Pressure also affects how gases behave inside organisms. At great depths, gases dissolve differently, and sudden changes can cause internal damage. To avoid this, many under-ice organisms either lack gas-filled spaces or maintain them at minimal levels. Fish in these waters often lack swim bladders. Instead of using internal gas to control buoyancy, they rely on oil deposits or structural adaptations that allow them to remain suspended in the water without expending excessive energy. This removes the risk that pressure changes pose for species that depend on gas pockets internally. The choice to rely on structural buoyancy rather than gas-based systems reflects the gradual influence of pressure over evolutionary time. Another important factor in cold, high-pressure environments is the rate at which organisms grow. Because chemical reactions occur slowly, growth takes much longer than in warmer environments. Many species develop over extended periods, adding small amounts of tissue gradually. Their lifespans reflect this pace. Some invertebrates and fish beneath the ice live far longer than their relatives in temperate waters. Their long lifespans allow them to accumulate the size and features needed to thrive in their environment. The slow pace of development reduces the energy required during early life stages, aligning with the limited nutrient availability. Instead of aiming for rapid maturity, these species follow steady trajectories supported by the environment's consistency. Reproduction also follows a slower path. Eggs develop gradually, larval stages last longer. Juveniles rely on stored nutrients or minimal amounts of available food. Many species produce fewer offspring than their relatives in more dynamic environments. Producing large numbers of eggs would require energy the ecosystem cannot support. Instead, organisms invest more energy in each offspring, increasing the chance of survival. These strategies reflect the need to conserve resources. Because predation pressure remains low compared to brighter, warmer ecosystems, producing fewer, well-prepared young becomes a viable approach. Some species demonstrate remarkable tolerance to oxygen fluctuations. Cold water can hold more dissolved oxygen than warm water, which benefits many organisms beneath the ice. Still, oxygen levels can vary depending on depth, water flow, and microbial activity. Some organisms adapt by developing larger surface areas for oxygen absorption. Sea spiders, for example, rely on their legs to absorb oxygen directly from the water. Their bodies remain small compared to their limbs, allowing them to maximize the area available for gas exchange. Fish without hemoglobin take advantage of the high oxygen content in cold water by circulating plasma efficiently through their bodies. These adaptations allow them to function without the molecules that many surface fish rely on. Microbial species also show adaptations to cold and pressure that extend beyond basic survival. They adjust their metabolic pathways to match the limited energy available. Some microbes use chemical reactions that require less energy input. Others slow their activity dramatically during periods of scarcity, entering states where they remain viable for long periods without significant metabolic output. These microbes form stable communities that act as energy sources for larger organisms. They maintain themselves by balancing activity with conservation, responding to environmental cues that shift at a gradual pace. Cold temperatures create predictable patterns that make long-term stability possible. The under-ice environment rarely experiences sudden warm periods or rapid shifts. This allows organisms to develop adaptations that remain effective over long time scales. Pressure also stays consistent. The thickness of the ice does not change rapidly. The weight pressing down on the water stays within steady ranges. This predictability encourages evolutionary strategies built around endurance rather than flexibility. Species do not need to handle frequent environmental shifts. Instead, they refine traits that work well under stable conditions. Some species possess molecular features that help them avoid protein denaturation. Protein structure is sensitive to pressure, temperature, and chemical changes. In cold, high-pressure environments, proteins risk becoming inactive. The organisms beneath the ice counter this by stabilizing certain amino acid sequences or adding small molecules that bind weakly to proteins, preventing them from unfolding or misfolding. These molecular strategies allow enzymes to remain functional despite slow reaction rates. The result is a system where metabolism remains reliable even when external temperatures hover near freezing. Pressure also influences the way organisms move. Many species adopt movements that distribute pressure evenly across their bodies. Sea cucumbers, for example, crawl with slow, controlled motions that keep their internal structures from experiencing sudden stress. Amphipods adjust their bodies so that pressure spreads across multiple segments. Fish adopt slow swimming methods that minimize internal vibrations. These movement patterns are not merely energy-saving strategies. They help organisms remain stable under the weight of the overlying ice. Some organisms develop rigid external structures that protect them from pressure. Certain invertebrates build thick outer layers that resist compression. Others incorporate minerals from the environment to create strong, supportive frameworks around their bodies. These protective structures do not hinder movement because the animals remain accustomed to slow, careful actions. They avoid sudden changes in position that would challenge the stability of their protective layers. Their bodies reflect a balance between flexibility and resistance. The interaction between cold and pressure also affects how organisms sense their surroundings. Visual cues offer little value because light does not penetrate the ice. Instead, many species rely on pressure-sensitive receptors or chemical detection systems. These sensory adaptations remain stable in cold conditions. They do not require rapid neural responses. Instead, they allow organisms to detect subtle changes in water flow or chemical composition. These slow but accurate senses match the pace of the environment. They help organisms navigate toward food sources, avoid unwanted contact, or locate mates. Cold temperatures slow decomposition as well. When a large organism dies, its body sinks or settles on the sea floor. Microbial activity breaks it down gradually, releasing nutrients into the surrounding water. This slow decomposition benefits the ecosystem by prolonging the availability of organic material. Scavengers locate the carcass using chemical cues, feeding on it over extended periods. The combination of microbial and invertebrate activity ensures that nutrients re-enter the ecosystem even though the process unfolds at a measured pace. Some species appear physically adapted to pressure in ways that remain poorly understood. Their cell structures show resistance to compression. Their proteins maintain stability. Their membranes behave differently than those of surface organisms. These features likely developed through small, gradual changes selected over long periods. The lack of sudden environmental shifts allows these adaptations to accumulate. Each incremental improvement benefits the organism, increasing the likelihood of survival. Over generations, these small changes produce species capable of thriving in conditions that appear extreme. The organisms shaped by cold and pressure also demonstrate how ecosystems can succeed without relying on rapid change or abundant energy. Their survival strategies revolve around endurance, efficiency, and stability. They fit the conditions because their biology supports slow, steady activity. Their bodies do not resist the cold or pressure, they operate within those constraints. This alignment between organism and environment creates a balanced system where each species contributes to long-term stability. These survivors also provide insight into what life might require on other worlds with similar conditions. If subsurface oceans exist on icy moons, they may host organisms shaped by cold and pressure. Understanding how Antarctic species manage these forces helps researchers imagine how life might adapt elsewhere. The principles that guide survival beneath the ice — energy conservation, structural stability, biochemical flexibility — could apply to alien ecosystems as well. As the view of these survivors becomes clearer, the next step involves examining how their feeding strategies reflect the environment they inhabit. Nutrient availability does not follow the pattern seen in warmer oceans. In this cold, dark sea, food moves slowly, arrives gradually, and requires organisms to adjust their behaviors accordingly. This transition leads directly into the next part of the journey, where the focus shifts to how the ecosystem supports itself when sunlight plays no role in providing energy. Feeding in the under-ice world does not resemble feeding in any familiar marine system. There are no waves of sunlight striking the water to trigger bursts of photosynthesis, no seasonal blooms that flood the ecosystem with energy, and no patterns of surface activity that create predictable surges of food. Instead, the creatures beneath Antarctica's ice depend on a food network built from chemical reactions, microbial activity, organic material drifting from distant regions, and the slow recycling of every available nutrient. This creates a series of feeding strategies shaped entirely by scarcity, stability, and the need to conserve more energy than is spent. What seems like a harsh limitation becomes the organising principle of the entire ecosystem. Every organism, from microbes to the largest fish in these waters, adjusts its feeding behaviour to the steady rhythm of a landscape where food arrives quietly and in small amounts. The foundation of this strange system lies with microbial communities that convert inorganic compounds into usable energy. These microbes form dense clusters on rocks, sediments, and ice walls. Larger organisms graze on them, creating the first links in the food web. Because microbial growth occurs slowly, grazing must remain measured. If a grazer consumes too much at once, the film will not regenerate quickly enough to sustain continued feeding. As a result, grazers move with deliberate patterns, scraping small amounts and then waiting for the microbes to regrow. This pacing ensures that both the microbes and the grazers maintain their roles in the ecosystem without exhausting their resources. For many organisms beneath the ice, feeding involves following chemical signals rather than searching visually for food. Copepods, amphipods, and similar crustaceans detect faint traces released by microbial films or organic particles. These signals guide them through the water until they reach an area with enough food to justify their movement. Because movement itself consumes energy, the animals must weigh the cost of travelling against the expected gain. Over generations, natural selection favours individuals capable of assessing these cues efficiently. The result is a community of grazers that move only when necessary and feed only on what they can process without wasting energy. Organic material drifting into the under-ice sea comes from several sources. Some arrives from open waters through cracks or channels beneath the ice shelves. These particles travel long distances carried by slow-moving currents. By the time they enter the subglacial environment, they may be partially degraded. Even so, they provide valuable nutrients for scavengers and microorganisms. Other organic material originates from the ecosystem itself. When organisms die, their remains sink or settle on the sea floor. Decomposition then becomes a long-term process driven by bacteria and small invertebrates. Each step releases compounds that support new microbial growth, helping maintain the cycle. Scavengers play a central role in breaking down larger organic pieces. Amphipods, isopods, and various worm species respond to chemical cues released by decomposing matter. These cues spread slowly through the water due to the low temperature, giving scavengers time to locate the source before it disperses. Once they find it, scavengers feed on the softer tissues first, leaving harder materials for microbes or other organisms. This ensures that usable nutrients re-enter the ecosystem over extended periods. Because decomposition happens gradually, a single carcass can sustain a community for months or even longer. This extended availability reduces the pressure to find food constantly. Some invertebrates have evolved feeding structures tailored to capturing fine particles rather than consuming discrete food items. These filter feeders pass water through specialized appendages or tissues. The slow circulation of water beneath the ice helps them filter small amounts of material continuously without encountering harmful debris or high sediment loads. The particles they capture may include microorganisms, organic fragments, or mineral-rich compounds. This strategy supports consistent nourishment without requiring active pursuit of food. Filter feeding in such environments depends on the steady movement of water, which remains predictable over long time scales. Larger organisms adopt strategies that combine predation, scavenging, and opportunistic feeding. Fish that live beneath the ice rely heavily on ambush techniques. Instead of chasing prey, they remain motionless until a smaller animal drifts close enough to capture. This minimizes energy use and allows them to feed on organisms that are not actively trying to escape. Even predators in this environment do not exhibit rapid, aggressive behavior. They feed with patience. Their bodies reflect this approach. Their muscles produce slow, steady movements. Their sensory systems detect small vibrations that indicate the presence of prey. Once a target comes close, they make a short, controlled motion to capture it. Some fish also feed on suspended particles, particularly those containing organic residues. Their mouths and gill structures allow them to process small amounts of particulate matter efficiently. This feeding method supplements their diet and helps them survive when living prey becomes scarce. By combining several feeding strategies, these fish avoid over-reliance on any single food source. This flexibility supports their survival in an environment where food availability fluctuates at a slow pace. Feeding behaviours in this environment often involve cooperation rather than competition. Because food arrives in small amounts and the ecosystem moves slowly, organisms do not rush to claim resources. When a drifting carcass enters an area, multiple species feed on it at different times and in different ways. Some remove soft tissue, others consume fragments left behind. Microbes handle what the invertebrates miss. This sequential feeding resembles a chain of interactions that leaves little waste. Every step contributes to nutrient recycling, allowing the system to remain balanced despite the low input of energy from outside the ecosystem. Microbial mats serve as feeding grounds for different organisms depending on their thickness and composition. Early-stage mats attract grazers that remove only the uppermost layers. As the mats grow thicker, filter feeders or scavengers may use fragments that break off naturally. Eventually the mats reach a point where they must shed old layers to maintain stability. These layers become resources for decomposers. This cycle continues indefinitely as long as minerals and chemical compounds remain available for microbial metabolism. The stability of the environment ensures that these mats regenerate at predictable rates. Worms that burrow into the sediment contribute to the feeding network by redistributing nutrients from deeper layers to the surface. Their movements bring buried organic matter closer to microbes and grazers. This slow churning of sediment mirrors the activity of earthworms in soil, though it occurs at much lower speeds. Burrowing also increases the oxygenation of sediment layers, allowing aerobic microbes to function. These processes support multiple feeding pathways, giving the ecosystem a structure built on small but continuous interactions between organisms of different sizes. Some invertebrates feed on dissolved organic material. They absorb nutrients through their outer tissues, taking advantage of small concentrations of usable molecules in the water. This method works well in environments with low nutrient density. Their bodies allow them to capture the minimal energy available without requiring specialized feeding structures. The slow pace of their metabolism aligns with this feeding strategy. They do not need large meals, they need consistent chemical access. The cold water helps preserve dissolved organic compounds for longer periods, making them available even after they have drifted far from their original source. Predators and scavengers often overlap in their feeding roles. A fish might capture a small grazer one day and feed on drifting fragments the next. Amphipods might take advantage of microbial mats when carcasses remain unavailable. This flexibility ensures that each species maintains adequate nourishment over long spans. Organisms that cannot switch between feeding strategies would struggle to survive in the steady but limited conditions beneath the ice. The ability to adapt feeding behaviours allows communities to remain robust even when food sources shift gradually. Energy conservation remains the key principle guiding feeding strategies. Every action comes with a cost. Organisms must balance movement with expected gains. Many species adopt sit-and-wait approaches that minimize energy loss. Even filter feeders rely on natural water flow, rather than generating strong currents themselves. Grazers move slowly, taking small bites and resting frequently. Scavengers pace their feeding according to decomposition rates, avoiding unnecessary competition. Predators limit their efforts to short, precise motions. The influence of microbial communities on feeding becomes even clearer when examining organisms that incorporate microbes into their bodies. Some invertebrates host chemosynthetic bacteria in specialized tissues. These bacteria produce nutrients internally by processing chemical compounds. This relationship allows the host to rely less on external food sources. The bacteria benefit from a stable environment within the organism. This symbiotic relationship provides nourishment even when external sources remain sparse. Such interactions expand the range of feeding strategies in the ecosystem and demonstrate how organisms can exploit chemical energy in different ways. In areas where geothermal activity introduces additional minerals into the water, feeding interactions become slightly more complex. Microbial communities here often grow faster due to increased access to energy sources. This attracts grazers, which then attract predators. Even so, the pace remains slow. The increased energy does not produce rapid population growth. Instead, it allows a modest expansion of feeding interactions. These pockets of activity show how even small changes in the environment can influence the structure of food webs beneath the ice. Organic material entering the ecosystem from the open ocean arrives primarily through small channels beneath ice shelves. These materials include dead plankton, fragmented algae, or remains of organisms that once lived far from the subglacial sea. When this material enters the under-ice environment, microbes begin breaking it down. Grazers then feed on the microbes or fragments of the material. This connection between distant ecosystems and the under-ice world extends the reach of the feeding network. Although the amount of material entering is small, it provides an occasional supplement that supports the long-term stability of multiple species. Feeding strategies beneath the ice also show how organisms avoid unnecessary risks. Because visibility is low, creatures must rely on non-visual cues to identify food. A strong chemical signal might indicate a fresh carcass, but it could also attract predators. Organisms learn to interpret subtle variations in these signals. Weak or diffuse cues may represent low risk. Strong signals might require caution. Over time, species develop instincts, or the functional equivalent of instincts, that guide their approach to feeding opportunities. This internal guidance system reduces the number of costly mistakes organisms make. Nutrient flow in this ecosystem depends on continuous but limited recycling. Little goes to waste. If an organism consumes more than it can use, microbes break down the excess. If a predator leaves fragments behind, scavengers take them. If sediment traps organic particles, burrowing organisms or microbes process them. The environment encourages a system where even the smallest nutrient becomes important. This makes feeding a cooperative process across species rather than a competitive struggle. The cold, dark conditions slow everything enough that organisms rarely interfere with each other's feeding opportunities. Because feeding activities occur slowly, they often leave behind patterns that reveal how organisms interact with their environment. Microbial mats show grazing marks. Sediment layers show tunnels created by burrowing species. Carcasses display signs of successive feeding by different organisms. These patterns help researchers understand how energy moves through the system. With every carcass, mat, or piece of drifting material, the ecosystem reorganizes itself in small, subtle ways that reflect long-term stability. The entire feeding network demonstrates that life does not need sunlight to create structure. It needs consistent processes that operate on timescales suited to the environment. Beneath the ice, these processes unfold gradually, shaped by chemical energy, microbial activity, and steady interactions among species. The result is an ecosystem where feeding resembles a long continuous cycle, rather than a series of dramatic events. Each organism fulfills its role without requiring sudden bursts of activity or large quantities of food. Understanding how these creatures feed provides a clearer picture of how they maintain stability in a place where energy arrives at a slow pace. Their survival depends on strategies shaped by their environment, patience, efficiency, and steady responses to limited resources. As these feeding interactions continue, they reveal a system that operates reliably even when external input remains minimal. The next step in this exploration leads toward the rare moments when the under-ice world encounters organisms or influences from beyond its usual boundaries, showing how visiting species or unusual events briefly alter the rhythm of these cold, quiet waters. The world beneath Antarctica's ice seems isolated enough that nothing from outside should ever enter it. Yet from time to time, researchers discover signs that this sealed environment has interacted, however briefly, with organisms or influences that do not normally belong there. These encounters do not involve dramatic invasions or rapid changes. Instead, they show up quietly, through small traces of unfamiliar species that drift in through cracks, chemicals carried by distant currents, or remnants of organisms that once lived far from the under-ice sea. When these visitors appear, they reveal something important about how connected even the most remote ecosystems can be. The under-ice world may function on its own terms, but it is not completely closed. It receives occasional inputs from places that operate under different conditions, and these moments provide insight into how life moves, adapts, and responds when boundaries shift. Some of the first unexpected visitors identified by researchers were organisms that resemble planktonic species from the open Southern Ocean. These species are not typical members of the under-ice community. They rely on faint traces of light or more abundant nutrients found in waters beyond the ice shelves. Yet fragments of these organisms sometimes appear beneath the ice, carried by water that seeps through small channels or openings. The creatures arriving in this way do not survive long in the deeper, darker regions. Their physiology does not prepare them for temperatures just above freezing, nor can they endure the pressure changes that occur as they drift downward. Even so, their presence confirms that open ocean currents occasionally reach the subglacial environment. These brief visitors provide material that microbes can use. Their bodies decompose slowly, releasing compounds that feed microbial communities and contribute to nutrient cycling. Although they do not become long-term residents, their temporary presence helps sustain the ecosystem. The under-ice environment relies on any available input, however small. It does not discriminate between material generated locally and material arriving from elsewhere. The sudden appearance of these fragments reflects the dynamic nature of the water movement beneath the ice, even if the overall ecosystem remains stable. In rare cases, organisms more complex than plankton appear beneath the ice. Some small fish species from the open ocean can navigate narrow channels beneath ice shelves, exploring areas far from their usual habitats. These fish do not represent stable populations beneath the ice, but their presence demonstrates that the boundary between the under-ice sea and the open ocean is permeable under the right conditions. When they enter this new environment, their behaviour often becomes cautious. They reduce their movement, explore slowly, and respond to unfamiliar chemical cues. They do not stay long. The extreme darkness and low temperatures limit how far they can travel before returning to warmer, more nutrient-rich waters. Occasionally, amphipods from the open ocean make their way into the subglacial world. Unlike fish, these animals can tolerate colder temperatures, at least for short periods. Their presence beneath the ice shows up when researchers deploy equipment and record unexpected shapes moving toward the light. These amphipods are likely exploring, following chemical trails or water currents. They feed briefly, sometimes even interacting with under-ice species before leaving. Their arrival may provide temporary boosts to local predators, which take advantage of the unfamiliar prey. Even so, these interactions rarely disrupt the ecosystem. The visiting species leave or die before they can alter population structures. One of the most intriguing forms of unexpected visitation involves microorganisms originating from regions far outside the Antarctic environment. Microbes can travel great distances by hitching rides on water currents, ice fragments, or even tiny pockets of air trapped in ice. Some microbes from temperate regions remain dormant during their journey, becoming active only when they reach conditions that support metabolic activity. When these visitors arrive beneath the ice, most cannot survive long due to the extreme cold and pressure. Still, a small subset may become part of the microbial community temporarily. Their genetic material may even integrate into existing populations through processes that occur naturally in microbial ecosystems. These rare exchanges provide opportunities for innovation within the local microbial networks, adding genetic variability to species that normally evolve slowly. Geothermal vents beneath Antarctica introduce another type of unexpected influence. Although these vents originate from deep within Earth, rather than distant ecosystems, they bring chemical compounds and heat that change local conditions. These changes can attract species not typically found in the coldest regions beneath the ice. Microbes that rely on warmer temperatures or different mineral compositions may appear briefly near these vents. Their presence suggests that pockets of diversity exist even in environments shaped by uniform cold. These small disruptions provide hints of how variable the under-ice world can become when geological processes introduce new elements. Some unexpected visitors take the form of organic particles from surface ecosystems. These include fragments of algae, microscopic plants, or material released by melting glaciers. When surface ice melts during warmer periods or as a result of shifting ice sheets, it releases trapped organic material that may be thousands of years old. These particles enter the subglacial waters and become available to microbes. Over time, the microbes break them down, releasing nutrients that feed the broader ecosystem. These ancient inputs show that the under-ice world does not rely solely on modern organic sources. It incorporates material produced long ago, demonstrating the longevity of nutrient cycles in this region. Another type of visitor appears when ice shelves crack or collapse slightly. These events expose areas of the under-ice world to open water or air for short periods. Winds, waves, or floating debris may introduce organisms that do not normally enter the subglacial environment. Some species, such as certain types of krill, may wander into newly opened spaces. They do not remain once the cracks close or the conditions return to their usual extremes, but their short-term presence demonstrates how shifts in ice structure can create temporary connections between distinct ecosystems. While these examples involve species originating from different regions of Earth, scientists also consider the possibility that the under-ice ecosystem could provide insight into life that exists beyond our planet. This does not mean that extraterrestrial organisms have visited Antarctica. Instead, the conditions beneath the ice resemble environments that may exist elsewhere, such as the oceans beneath the icy surfaces of moons like Europa or Enceladus. These places remain hidden beneath thick shells of ice, receiving no sunlight and depending on chemical reactions for energy. If life exists there, it may resemble the organisms thriving in Antarctica's subglacial waters. By studying this environment, researchers gain clues about how life might emerge or persist beyond Earth. The influence of planetary science on Antarctic research appears in the instruments used. Scientists design probes capable of drilling through ice and analysing water beneath it, similar to tools that might one day explore icy moons. The microorganisms beneath Antarctica show how life can adapt to isolation. Their feeding strategies demonstrate the feasibility of chemical energy sustaining complex systems. Their slow metabolism illustrates how organisms may survive long periods without abundant resources. In this sense, the under-ice world becomes a natural laboratory for exploring questions about life in other parts of the solar system. These comparisons lead to discussions about what qualifies as a visitor from other worlds. In strictly biological terms, no organism from outside Earth has reached Antarctica's under-ice sea. However, by exploring how life might exist under similar conditions elsewhere, researchers use the Antarctic environment to test ideas about extraterrestrial ecosystems. This intellectual connection does not change the physical conditions beneath the ice, but it broadens the context in which scientists interpret what they observe. The similarities between Earth's subglacial waters and potential extraterrestrial oceans create opportunities for speculation grounded in realistic scientific principles. Even without extraterrestrial organisms entering the ecosystem, the under-ice world experiences enough unusual visitors to remind researchers that isolation is rarely absolute. Water movement, geological events, and the slow drift of organic matter create openings for external influence. These influences do not dominate or transform the ecosystem, but they add complexity. They demonstrate that the environment beneath the ice interacts with processes occurring elsewhere on Earth. These connections unfold slowly, reflecting the pace of the environment itself. Visitors from the open ocean appear only when conditions permit. Cracks in the ice shelves act as temporary corridors. Water rising from deeper layers of the Southern Ocean may carry species into the subglacial world. These species do not remain long enough to establish stable populations. Even so, their presence shows how fluid the borders can be, even in an environment known for its stability. Researchers studying these movements gain a clearer picture of how ecosystems that appear isolated still experience external influences. Microbes carried by the wind or trapped in ice layers add another layer of complexity. Some microbes survive freezing, drifting for long periods before reaching water where they can become active again. When ice melts, they enter the under-ice environment. Their impact remains small, but they offer a reminder that microscopic life can travel across vast distances. The subglacial world may not welcome them permanently, but it cannot avoid occasional contact. The low temperature ensures that most die or become dormant again. The community beneath the ice remains dominated by species adapted to the local environment, but traces of external microbes serve as records of long-range biological movement. The idea of visitors from other worlds grows more meaningful when considering how similar Earth's subglacial waters might be to extraterrestrial environments. The organisms living here demonstrate that life can persist without sunlight, relying on chemical energy. They show that slow metabolic processes can sustain functioning ecosystems. They reveal how organisms adapt to pressure, cold, and isolation. These traits match what scientists anticipate in extraterrestrial oceans. The similarities encourage researchers to use Antarctica as a model for astrobiology. The under-ice world becomes not only an isolated ecosystem but a proxy for understanding environments that exist far beyond our planet. This perspective does not change the local interactions among species. It simply contextualizes them within a larger scientific framework. When researchers consider how unfamiliar organisms might behave upon entering this environment, they use knowledge gained from observing how Earth-based visitors adapt briefly before leaving. If an extraterrestrial organism were to enter such a system, its chances of survival would depend on how closely its physiology matched that of Earth's cold-adapted species. Without these traits, survival would be unlikely. The under-ice world demands specialized adaptations. Any visitor lacking them would face the same challenges that surface species face today. The under-ice environment continues to surprise researchers with the diversity of organisms that appear unexpectedly. Each visitor, whether a drifting plankton fragment, a curious amphipod, or a temporary open ocean fish, offers a glimpse into the permeability of the ecosystem. These visitors do not stay long, but they provide clues about how connected the ecosystem remains to the larger world. They reveal pathways for nutrient exchange, opportunities for genetic interaction among microbes, and occasional moments when larger species explore unfamiliar regions. Understanding these unexpected presences adds depth to the study of life beneath the ice. It demonstrates that the ecosystem, while stable, remains influenced by distant sources. The organisms that thrive there maintain their structure because the visitors do not remain long enough to disrupt the system. Instead, their brief appearances complement the slow cycles already in place. As these glimpses of external influence become clearer, the next part of the journey turns toward the lessons these organisms teach about endurance and adaptability, showing how their presence in such extreme conditions helps illuminate the broader capabilities of life across diverse environments. The creatures beneath Antarctica's ice reveal a version of survival that differs from the one most ecosystems teach. On the surface, survival often appears tied to speed, competition, and the ability to respond quickly to changing conditions. Animals race for food, flee from predators, or adapt rapidly to shifting weather patterns. Yet none of these expectations hold true beneath the ice. In this cold, dark environment, survival reflects an entirely different set of priorities. These creatures demonstrate that endurance can matter more than aggression, that efficiency can replace speed, and that stability can guide evolution more strongly than constant change. Their biology and behaviour offer a clear look at how life reorganises itself when traditional resources become scarce and environmental conditions remain steady over long stretches of time. The first lesson these creatures illustrate involves energy management. Every organism here faces the same central constraint. Food appears slowly, and the environment does not support large or sudden surges of energy intake. This means survival depends on conserving energy rather than expending it. Grazers avoid unnecessary movement. Predators wait patiently for food to come close. Scavengers feed at a pace dictated by slow decomposition. Filter feeders rely on steady currents instead of actively seeking food. In this ecosystem, energy becomes a resource that must be used sparingly. The organisms that thrive are those that consume only what they need and perform only the actions that support their long-term stability. This principle extends to movement as well. Movement in this environment is rarely rapid. Even large creatures move slowly, adjusting their positions with measured care. They do not need to flee from predators that rely on vision, nor do they need to chase prey across large distances. Instead, they move as little as possible, focusing on efficiency. This slow approach does not represent weakness. It reflects a highly optimized strategy for navigating an ecosystem shaped by scarcity. The creatures that survive are not those that move the fastest, but those that move in ways that align with the energy available to them. Another lesson comes from the adaptations these organisms display at the molecular level. Their proteins remain flexible at low temperatures. Their membranes stay fluid even near freezing. Their tissues avoid damage from ice crystal formation. These features show how organisms tailor their bodies to match extreme conditions. Instead of forcing a warm weather physiology into a cold environment, they develop structures that operate naturally at low temperatures. This approach reveals that survival often depends on adjusting internal systems to match external forces rather than resisting those forces. The organisms beneath the ice succeed because they allow their biology to shift gradually over generations, settling into forms that work with cold conditions instead of working against them. Pressure also shapes survival strategies beneath the ice. Organisms here do not merely endure the weight of the overlying ice. They function normally under it. Their internal structures remain stable. Their proteins resist deformation. Their cells avoid collapsing under compression. This tolerance arises from specific adaptations developed slowly over long periods. These adaptations highlight another lesson. Survival in extreme environments often depends on incremental changes rather than dramatic shifts. Small adjustments accumulated over generations produce stable solutions. The creatures beneath the ice demonstrate how cumulative adaptation becomes more effective than rapid overhauls. Their bodies reflect slow, continuous refinement. The ecosystem also teaches survival through interdependence. Microbial communities provide the foundation for nearly all food sources. Grazers depend on microbial films. Predators depend on grazers. Decomposers recycle nutrients back into forms microbes can use. Without each group fulfilling its role, the ecosystem would lose stability. Survival here does not involve dominating competitors. It requires fitting into a structure where every organism contributes to long-term balance. This interdependence shows that survival can result from cooperation just as much as competition. Each creature supports the system simply by following its natural patterns. Another insight comes from how these organisms respond to limited resources. Instead of trying to expand rapidly when food becomes available, they maintain steady growth. Their populations do not spike dramatically. They increase slowly, matching the long-term availability of nutrients. This steady approach prevents overuse of resources. It ensures that the environment can support future generations. This behavior contrasts with ecosystems where organisms reproduce quickly during periods of abundance. Under the ice, such spikes would deplete resources faster than they could regenerate. The creatures here show that survival sometimes depends on restraint. Their reproductive strategies reinforce this lesson. Many species produce fewer offspring, but each offspring has a higher chance of survival. Eggs and larvae develop slowly. They rely on stored nutrients or small amounts of external food. These reproductive patterns demonstrate that longevity and slow development can serve as effective survival strategies. In environments shaped by stability rather than abrupt change, slow reproduction aligns better with the pace of the ecosystem. It ensures that population levels remain sustainable. Another lesson involves resilience. These creatures tolerate conditions that would damage or kill many surface species. They handle extreme cold, high pressure, limited oxygen, and scarce nutrients. Their resilience comes not from a single adaptation, but from an integrated system of traits. Their enzymes function at low temperatures. Their membranes resist freezing. Their body structures tolerate compression. Their metabolism slows without stalling. These combined traits show that resilience arises from the accumulation of multiple small adaptations rather than from a single dramatic change. Each trait contributes to the overall ability of the organism to survive under demanding conditions. The organisms beneath the ice also demonstrate the value of stability. Their environment changes very slowly. Temperatures remain near freezing. Pressure stays consistent. Nutrient input follows predictable patterns. This stability allows organisms to refine traits that work within narrow ranges. It shows that survival does not always require flexibility. In some environments, success comes from refining a strategy that matches stable conditions. The creatures beneath the ice thrive because they fit the environment closely. Their bodies reflect the specific demands of cold, pressure, and limited energy. While stability shapes many aspects of survival here, occasional disruptions introduce additional lessons. When external organisms drift into the under-ice world, the resident species respond without dramatic reactions. Predators feed on the newcomers if the opportunity arises. Microbes break down their bodies. The ecosystem absorbs these inputs calmly. This shows that survival includes the ability to incorporate rare or unexpected changes without destabilizing the system. The under-ice environment does not depend on rigid responses. Instead, it integrates small disturbances into existing cycles. Another lesson comes from how sensory systems function in this environment. Without light, organisms must rely on touch, vibration, and chemical cues. Their sensory systems do not need to process large amounts of visual information quickly. They need to detect faint signals accurately. This focus on precision over speed demonstrates that survival often depends on the ability to gather the right information rather than a large volume of information. Organisms beneath the ice succeed because their sensory systems match the available cues. They detect what matters and ignore what does not exist. The feeding behaviours observed beneath the ice further illustrate how survival can take unexpected forms. Predators do not chase prey, they wait. Grazers do not consume entire patches of microbes, they take small amounts. Scavengers follow chemical signals to food sources rather than searching widely. These strategies show that survival does not always require dominance or aggression. Instead, it can result from patience, careful assessment, and consistent behaviour. The recycling of nutrients in this ecosystem offers another perspective on survival. Nothing is wasted. When a creature dies, microbes break down its tissues. Scavengers consume fragments. The released nutrients support new microbial growth. This cycle extends the usefulness of every piece of organic matter. It demonstrates that survival depends on resource efficiency. In environments with limited inputs, cycles that maximize resource use become essential. The organisms beneath the ice also show how survival can become a long-term process rather than a reaction to immediate threats. Many species live unusually long lives compared to relatives in warmer environments. Their slow growth and low metabolic rates support extended lifespans. These long lives give them more time to reproduce and contribute to the stability of the ecosystem. The environment rewards longevity because it aligns with the slow pace of change. This contrasts with ecosystems where rapid turnover provides an advantage. Beneath the ice, long-term persistence becomes the measure of success. Another lesson involves genetic adaptation. The creatures here evolve slowly due to long lifespans and consistent conditions. Their mutations accumulate gradually. The resulting adaptations remain subtle but effective. This slow evolutionary pace shows that survival does not always require rapid innovation. In stable environments, slow refinement can produce highly specialized organisms. Their genetic makeup reflects countless small adjustments rather than a few large leaps. Their presence also reveals how survival depends on matching environmental rhythms. Everything beneath the ice moves slowly. Nutrient flow, growth rates, reproductive cycles, and population changes. The organisms do not fight this rhythm. They adopt it. Their internal processes mirror the external pace. Survival becomes possible because their bodies operate in harmony with the environment. These creatures also highlight the importance of using available resources creatively. Microbes use chemical energy because sunlight does not penetrate the ice. Grazers feed on microbial films. Predators exploit slow-moving prey. Each organism takes advantage of what the environment provides. This creativity does not involve dramatic behaviours. It comes from consistent use of whatever energy sources exist. Their existence challenges assumptions about the limits of life. Many ecosystems depend on sunlight, warmth, or rapid nutrient cycling. The organisms beneath the ice demonstrate that life can persist under vastly different conditions. They show that survival depends less on ideal circumstances and more on the ability to adapt to whatever environment exists. Their success expands the definition of habitable conditions. It shows that cold, dark, high-pressure environments can support complex ecosystems. These lessons extend beyond Antarctica. They influence how researchers think about life on other planets or moons. If organisms can survive beneath Earth's ice sheets, similar organisms might survive in subsurface oceans elsewhere. By studying these creatures, scientists learn how chemical energy supports ecosystems, how slow metabolic rates function, and how adaptations accumulate over long periods. The lessons gained from these creatures shape our understanding of where life might exist beyond Earth. All of these insights lead to a broader view of survival. It becomes clear that survival is not a single behaviour or trait. It is a continuous alignment between organisms and their environment. It involves matching pace, using energy efficiently, refining traits gradually, and maintaining balance within a community. The creatures beneath Antarctica's ice embody this approach. Their entire existence demonstrates how life responds to extreme conditions without relying on speed, aggression, or constant change. As these lessons accumulate, they prepare the way for one more step in this journey. The final part brings the focus back to the quiet environment itself and the reflections it invites, looking at how all of these interactions form a continuous, steady reminder of life's ability to persist in places that seem unwelcoming at first glance. Everything that lives beneath Antarctica's ice moves according to a rhythm shaped by the environment itself. That rhythm is slow and consistent, defined by cold water, steady pressure, and limited energy arriving in small amounts spread over long periods. Observing it long enough makes it clear that the ecosystem does not rely on dramatic events or rapid changes. It functions through steady interactions, gentle feeding patterns, and the careful use of every available resource. As the view widens to take in all the organisms that have appeared throughout this journey, the scale of that quiet persistence becomes easier to recognize. Each organism, from the smallest microbe to the largest fish, contributes to a pattern of life that continues without the forces that shape most familiar ecosystems. Instead of sunlight, warmth, or seasonal variation, it depends on endurance, stability, and long-term adaptation. Stepping back from the details reveals how closely the behaviour of these organisms matches the environment. Microbes adjust their metabolic rates to match the cold. Grazers limit their movement to conserve energy. Predators rely on patience rather than speed. Scavengers respond to decomposition that unfolds slowly. This matching of internal processes to external conditions creates a tightly balanced system where every organism fits its role without wasting energy. It becomes clear that the environment beneath the ice does not reward excess, it rewards consistency. Survival depends on actions carried out at the right pace, supported by bodies built for slow processes rather than fast ones. This calm stability does not reduce the complexity of the ecosystem. Instead, it reveals how many different strategies can succeed when time becomes the organizing factor. Microbes shape the basic energy flow. Invertebrates distribute nutrients through grazing, filtering, or burrowing. Larger creatures form connections between different layers of the food web. Their interactions do not produce sharp fluctuations. They generate a steady exchange that keeps the system functioning. This predictable pattern allows organisms to refine specific traits over many generations. They do not need adaptations for sudden shifts. They need refinements that make slow processes more reliable. Looking across the species that inhabit this environment shows how thoroughly each one has aligned itself with long-term efficiency. Their bodies contain biochemical solutions that prevent freezing, structural adaptations that handle pressure, and metabolic pathways that operate in cold conditions. They do not rely on specialized organs designed for rapid responses. Instead, they possess systems that remain stable, even when processes slow significantly. Many of their features appear unusual only when compared to creatures living in more dynamic environments. Within the under-ice world, these traits fit naturally. One of the striking aspects of this ecosystem is how little waste it produces. When something dies, decomposition begins slowly. Microbes break down tissues. Scavengers remove parts that become available to them. Over time, all components of the body return to the ecosystem in forms other organisms can use. This cycling repeats continually, supporting the next generation of microbes and the grazers that depend on them. The environment does not allow rapid decomposition, but it ensures that everything eventually becomes useful again. This reflects a long-term approach to resource management shaped by the limitations of the environment. Nothing is lost. Everything re-enters the system in a form that supports continued life. The organisms beneath the ice also demonstrate how survival strategies can differ based on environmental consistency. In ecosystems with strong seasonal cycles, creatures must respond to rapid changes in light, temperature, and resource availability. They must grow quickly, reproduce in short bursts, or migrate long distances. None of those strategies apply beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Here, temperature remains nearly constant. Pressure does not fluctuate. Nutrient input varies only slightly over long periods. The stability encourages adaptation built on steady increments, rather than rapid shifts. The organisms evolve slowly, refining features that work consistently. This reveals a different side of evolution, one guided not by constant disruption but by long-term reliability. Even the way species interact shows how much stability influences behavior. Competition for resources occurs, but rarely in an aggressive form. Organisms take what they need without trying to eliminate others. The pace of the environment makes it unnecessary to fight for dominance. Instead, the ecosystem organizes itself according to natural distribution patterns. Microbial mats appear where chemical compounds support them. Grazers gather in places where microbial growth is adequate. Predators position themselves in areas where prey pass frequently enough to support them. These patterns remain consistent over time because the environment does not shift quickly enough to disrupt them. The microbial communities that form the base of the food web demonstrate how survival can depend on chemical energy rather than sunlight. Their metabolic pathways process minerals and compounds that drift through the water or emerge from sediments. These reactions release small but steady amounts of energy. Larger organisms take advantage of this consistency. They do not require large meals. They need steady access to small amounts of nutrients. The environment beneath the ice supports this structure by providing ongoing sources of chemical energy, making it possible for life to persist in a place where photosynthesis cannot occur. Viewing the larger creatures through this lens makes their adaptations easier to understand. Fish with transparent blood, sea spiders with oxygen-absorbing legs, amphipods reaching sizes larger than expected, and worms with structures suited for slow, steady feeding, all demonstrate how organisms adjust to specific challenges. Their shapes, internal systems, and behaviours reflect an environment where conserving energy matters more than reacting quickly. Their survival depends on traits that support long periods of low metabolic activity, allowing them to endure long stretches with minimal food. Their bodies show how far adaptation can go when shaped by cold, pressure, and a slow pace. The unexpected visitors described earlier also contribute to this broader picture. Their presence illustrates that even the most isolated environments receive occasional external influences. These visitors do not remain, but they offer clues about how connected ecosystems can be despite physical barriers. Their brief appearances provide nutrients that enrich the local communities. They show that life beneath the ice interacts indirectly with distant regions. These interactions highlight a different aspect of survival: the ability to incorporate external inputs without losing balance. The ecosystem absorbs these changes without altering its core structure. The organisms living in this environment provide lessons about endurance that extend beyond Earth. Their existence supports the idea that life can persist without sunlight, relying on chemical energy instead. They demonstrate how slow metabolic rates can sustain organisms in environments with limited energy. Their adaptations show that life can function under high pressure and extreme cold. These traits match conditions expected in subsurface oceans on icy moons. Studying the organisms beneath Antarctica's ice helps researchers imagine how life might appear elsewhere, not by relying on speculation, but by observing real examples of organisms shaped by similar constraints. Their behaviour also offers insight into how ecosystems form when external energy input remains minimal. Instead of building around rapid growth or active predation, such ecosystems rely on recycling, careful energy management, and slow-moving interactions. The Antarctic under-ice world provides a clear example of how such systems can remain functional over long periods. It demonstrates that life does not require abundant resources. It requires consistency, stability, and the ability to adapt to whatever energy sources exist. Examining these organisms collectively shows how survival takes many forms. Some species persist by minimizing activity. Others survive by maintaining flexible biological systems. Some rely on chemical reactions that operate efficiently at low temperatures. Others use structural features to withstand pressure. Their variety reveals that survival is not tied to a single strategy. It emerges from the interaction between organisms and their environment. When the environment sets clear constraints, life adjusts until it fits those constraints. Throughout this journey, one theme has remained consistent. Everything operates according to a pace defined by the environment itself. Each organism aligns with that pace. Movement slows, feeding slows, growth slows, reproduction slows, even decomposition slows. The entire ecosystem exists within this rhythm, shaped entirely by the steady forces of cold and pressure. This provides a rare opportunity to observe life as it responds not to constant change but to near-total stability. The organisms beneath the ice offer a view into how life behaves when everything unfolds gradually. Their presence also invites reflection on the possibilities that exist in environments humans might consider uninhabitable. Without light, warmth, or rapid nutrient flow, many would assume that life could not take hold. Yet the organisms beneath the ice make it clear that life finds a way as long as fundamental sources of energy exist. The under-ice world becomes an example of what is possible when organisms adapt fully to their surroundings, demonstrating resilience without relying on conditions that define most ecosystems. As the view settles on these creatures and the environment they inhabit, the patterns of their existence become more understandable. They do not fight the cold or pressure. They do not attempt to operate at speeds mismatched with their surroundings. They respond to the environment by adopting its pace. This alignment becomes their form of survival. It shows how life can remain stable even when external conditions seem overwhelmingly restrictive. Seeing this ecosystem as a whole brings the journey to a point where every observation fits into one cohesive picture. The microbes that rely on chemical reactions, the grazers that conserve energy, the predators that wait patiently, the scavengers that follow slow decomposition, and the larger organisms shaped by cold and pressure all contribute to a system that continues quietly beneath the ice. Nothing in this environment moves quickly, nothing shifts abruptly, yet everything functions, everything persists. The balance remains intact because each organism operates according to the same underlying rhythm. The view of this world does not end with isolation or limitation. Instead, it opens toward a broader understanding of life's ability to endure. The creatures beneath the ice demonstrate that survival involves more than resisting difficulty. It involves adapting until difficulty becomes normal. Their existence shows that life can persist in places where surface-dwelling species might not expect it, revealing possibilities that extend beyond this single environment. As the journey through this under-ice world slows once again, the focus turns gently back to the interconnectedness of all these observations. The environment, the organisms, and the steady interactions form a continuous pattern that remains consistent across countless cycles. The stillness of the water, the quiet movements of the animals, and the slow growth of microbial communities all reinforce the idea that survival does not always require motion or noise. Sometimes it requires patience, efficiency, and a willingness to function within the limits of the environment. With these patterns in view, the path remains open to continue exploring the implications of this ecosystem, whether in understanding similar environments on Earth or in imagining what might exist in distant oceans beyond our planet. The rhythm of the under-ice world continues, steady and unbroken, carrying the same quiet persistence that has shaped every organism described so far, offering space for further reflection as the journey moves onward without abruptness or finality.